Number 5. The story of Edgar Mitchell. Edgar Mitchell is a storied man. He's part of an incredibly exclusive club out of 12 other people who can claim that they have seen the Earth standing on the surface of the moon. I assume they all have a group chat together. He's best known for typing 80 lines of code to save the Apollo 14 mission as it descended to the moon in 1971. He was the 6th man to ever walk on the moon, and he is a devout believer in aliens being out there. He insists that he knows that top government and military officials were hiding the truth behind aliens in New Mexico. He said it was a known secret that alien spacecraft were responsible for disabling nuclear missiles and shooting them down, supposing that aliens are directly involved in intervention to prevent us from destroying the planet. Which, if that's the case, I've got nothing but thanks to give for our extraterrestrial friends. Thanks for that. We're not that responsible. He goes on to insist that the Roswell incident was real, and the government had covered it up and buried it as a conspiracy theory to deter people from finding out the real truth, which he believes NASA thinks the public simply wouldn't be able to handle. In 2004, he told a Floridan newspaper that he knew of a secret cabal inside the American government that was responsible for studying alien bodies, and that after JFK, this group no longer answered to the president and didn't include the commander-in-chief in their briefings. Mr. Mitchell is quoted as saying, "They all know that UFOs are real. The question is, where are they coming from?" Now, NASA didn't quite have the same tune. NASA themselves obviously denied all of Mitchell's statements, saying that Edgar Mitchell is a great American, but we don't share his opinions on this issue. Well, of course. If you've been sitting on a secret for 60 years, you're not gonna fold over one guy, but a bunch of evidence? Well, maybe. My goblins, you know what time it is. If you've been digging the scares, stick around and subscribe for some scary stuff every single day. Okay, let's creep on. Number 4. Luis Elizondo. Luis Elizondo is one of the most outspoken believers in aliens and UAPs out there today, alongside Tom DeLonge, championing that he believes firmly that NASA and the Pentagon aren't telling us all the whole truth. And he would know, as Elizondo formerly led a research team to research potential UFOs. Although the project was disbanded, Elizondo never gave up his mission, believing it to be his personal calling to expose the truth. He's been quoted many times saying, "My personal belief is there's very compelling evidence that we are not alone." He served on the Department of Defense and resigned in 2012 over excessive secrecy surrounding the UAP program. These aircraft, we'll call them aircraft, are displaying characteristics that are not currently within the US inventory, nor in any foreign inventory that we are aware of, Elizondo said of the objects they researched in his time there. He added that the program was founded to analyze unexplained aerial phenomena and ascertain whether or not that what they were seeing is a threat to national security or not. Kind of unnervingly, when asked about that, he said, "We found a lot. We identified anomalous aircraft that are seemingly defying the laws of aerodynamics." Which, oh hey, coming from the mouth of someone who worked at the Pentagon, that seems just a little bit suspicious, right? Right? Not just me? The quote continues, "Things that don't have any obvious flight surfaces, any obvious forms of propulsion, and maneuvering in ways that include extreme maneuverability beyond, I would submit, the healthy G-forces of a human or anything biological." Elizondo's gone so far in the past as to suggest that he thinks the US government has fragments of UFOs or UAPs somewhere, reverse engineering it to learn all their secrets. Sounds extremely like someone higher up didn't want people finding out about whatever Elizondo was getting onto. And why not? Number 3. The signal. Now, when it comes to aliens, we all kind of assume in the back of our heads that our first direct contact with them is going to be very up close and personal. That they'll come down and hopefully we'll see them face to face or face to mandible, or perhaps we'll see their ships descending on us and it's already too late. But what if our first contact was something else? A radar signal, a noise through the silence of space. In 2003, astronomers working for the SETI, short for the Search for Extra Intelligence, a project dedicated to hunting for extraterrestrial life, were using a massive telescope to look to the stars. Now, nothing much came of it except for a series of unexplained radio signals from the skies. These signals all disappeared over time except one, which was growing stronger and stronger. The signal comes from somewhere between the constellation of Pisces and Aries, and curiously, the signal is at a frequency that absorbs and emits energy. Naturally, the researchers found this a bit interesting. Some of the astronomers believe that this could be a frequency that extraterrestrials are using to try and get our attention, like an intergalactic "you up" text. While it could very well have turned out to just be totally nothing or some sort of natural explanation that I'm not nearly smart enough to understand, I'm gonna err on the side of extraterrestrials. But we have to wonder what the signal was, right? I mean, we have to admit that's a bit suspicious, that there's something worth looking into there. Now, this story is from 2003 and I had trouble finding an update on it. But who knows? Whatever was broadcasting that could still be out there. Number 2, Blue Book. Now, I think we all kind of secretly suspect that some of our tax dollars are going to research aliens. I mean, what else are they doing all day? Well, in one form or another, government agencies have always been researching UFOs and UAPs. Since 1949 to 1969, Project Blue Book was the code name for a secret government research division dedicated to analyzing UAP technology, analyzing whether or not UAPs on record were threats to air and national securities, and just what any of this stuff in the sky was. It was basically the closest thing we had to a real-life X-Files department, as far as we know. I mean, there could be an even more secret one. Surely with all that government money, they must have found something special, right? Well, if you'd like to feel like Agent Mulder yourself, you can scroll through 130,000 pages of declassified documents from UFO specialist John Greenwald, who made it all available for free online. He's a defender of free information. Greenwald says secrets are not bad things. I think we should know about this and it should be in the history books. John, I completely agree. All this stuff about cover-ups, we can totally handle finding out aliens are real, okay? You know, we're big now, we're responsible, we learned about Santa, we can do this. A couple years ago, we experienced a wave where there were clowns hanging out on the street corner of like every rural street in North America. We got over that. We all saw Tiger King together. Aliens won't even be that weird, I don't think. Now, Project Blue Book was officially disbanded because according to a joint review, nothing significant ever came from it. Now, since then, it was thought that no government agency was looking into UAP research at all, except until the UAP document quietly dropped this year, you know, sneaking it under the door that NASA and the Air Force had been researching aliens and possible sightings this whole time under everybody's nose, and they leaked a bunch of documents and footage, and you should look it up after this video because I'm not joking, it's totally real. It seems just like us, NASA can't rest until they find the truth out there. Number 1, new developments. We are probably coming to one of the most exciting times in UAP history, as after the UAP report came out, there is probably more legitimacy towards the discussion around the serious existence of extraterrestrial life now more than ever. As of October 2022, NASA is pretty much coming clean and opening a new study into the research of UAP and extraterrestrial life. 16 hand-picked specialists have been selected to analyze former data and determine how to go forward observing future events. Now, the study is less focused on whether or not previous sightings are confirmed UAPs, since it's kind of hard to ascertain with missing data. So it's more focused on what observations will be needed to understand UAP sightings going forward. The team is going to include researchers and key personnel from all divisions, all walks of life, notably including former astronaut Scott Kellet, who formerly served as a pilot for the Space Shuttle Discovery, and also once held the world record for most days in space, so he probably knows a thing or two about objects floating in the stars. Now, Kelly himself doesn't personally believe aliens have been to Earth yet, saying, "I think there's life in the universe. Hopefully intelligent life, but I don't think they visit planet Earth." So there's some skeptics on the team, but hey, at least they're finally coming out to get to brass tacks on this thing. Officially, openly, the government is talking with us about studying this phenomena. This is amazing. Now, you know how scientists are. They gotta have some numbers on a paper before they'll believe it. An associate administrator at NASA, Thomas Zerbchin, said, "Data is the language of scientists and makes the unexplainable explainable. Exploring the unknown of space and the atmosphere is at the heart of who we are at NASA. This is maybe the most exciting time in history to be a UAP fan." Number 5, the Allagash Abduction. Our first tale is known as the Allagash Abduction. And by the way, what a turn of a phrase. That sounds like a great airplane book. Named after the Allagash Waterway in Maine, where it took place. In 1976, a group of 4 friends, who'd all met in college, were taking a trip camping, canoeing, and relaxing. The trip would be a trip they would never forget, and not just because of the salmon. The men, twin brothers Jack and Jim, and friends Chuck and Charlie, all decided to go out fishing on the lake at night. Before setting off though, they made sure to light a large campfire to act as a visible landmark from the water. Now the evening transpired fairly normally, fishing, sharing stories, until the men saw a blinding light in the sky above them. A glowing orb that shone brighter than any light any of the men had ever seen, flashing all sorts of bright, radiant colors. Now the object was hard to make out, but it looked to be about 80 meters in diameter, and was slowly approaching the fishing boat. The men hurriedly panicked and paddled back to the shoreline, only to discover that the campfire they had been lit had been completely smoldered and looked to have been put out hours and hours ago, despite the men having not been out nearly that long. Stranger still, a few days after the trip, the men all started reporting similar nightmares, seeing a silver operating room and long, tall, giant-headed creatures examining them in this room, taking samples of their blood, their skin, and so on. All of them described the room, the creatures, and the nightmares extremely similarly. The men underwent psychiatric evaluation and were all deemed mentally stable, even passing polygraph tests. So what happened? Could this have been a mass hallucination? Or were these men plucked by visitors from another world for study? And if you love UFO stories and alien abduction stories, we've got plenty more where that came from at Top 5 Scary. So toss a subscribe and keep on creeping on. Number 4, the mysterious man. Our next story comes to us from the internet's campfire, Reddit. A thread was posted asking abductees, or people who've got an abduction story to share their experience. Now the whole thing is really a highlight, but this one stood out for me. Take a listen, because this anonymous Redditor shared a truly unforgettable, strange experience. He was living in Washington at the time, and he and his friends were really big stargazers. One Thanksgiving, he got invited to stay with his friend's family. So they all went out to go do some stargazing, went out to a big field of knee-high grass, and were staring up at what they thought was a bunch of shooting stars. The original poster asked his friend what the light was, but he said he had no idea. The light was bobbing around, bouncing wildly in the sky like a pinball. Then all of a sudden, it fizzled out. Puzzled, but not disturbed, the friends continued on with their night, walking through the field, wondering what they'd seen, even joking that maybe it was a UFO, but assuming it must have been a drone or something. And then it gets weird. They came across a young man standing alone in the field. They were the only people there for miles around, and the poster said he would have been able to see him from where he was. So he said it was almost as if he appeared in front of them. He was wearing only ratty jeans and nothing else. It was the middle of November, so the attire was particularly odd. Now the friends were scared to approach him, but OP felt necessary to go forward. He said he didn't sound drunk, but that he did seem visibly stirred. He asked the strange man what had happened, and he said he did not want to talk about it, but he needed to be examined at a hospital immediately. The Redditor gave the man his jacket and saw him into an ambulance, where he was then taken off to a hospital. What happened? Was this man an abductee who'd been dropped off? Was the light they saw flooding around him being beamed down? We may never know. Number 3, the 1979 Spain sighting. Another Reddit thread asking a similar question asked users to share their stories of famous UFO and alien sightings from their country, bringing us this story from Spain that took place in November 1979. A plane took off from Mallorca, coming from Austria and heading to Tenerife. Not long after, it found red lights in the sky hovering ahead of it. Now initially the pilots assumed it was just another plane. The flight crew tried to signal over the radio to find out what was on their flight path. But neither the air traffic controller in Barcelona nor the military radar had any idea what it was they had encountered, as nothing else should have been sharing the airspace with them at this time. The plane ascended, hoping to avoid the flight path of the UFO and to try and get a look to ascertain just what they were flying up with. The UFO kept getting closer and closer, so the pilots did an emergency landing in Valencia. The UFO had a similar idea and followed them around till it landed. The original plane's radar started to pick up 3 objects flying behind them. The military had sent out 2 planes to try and assess and contain the situation. They found a giant red light floating statically over the airport, even though it wasn't being picked up on by the radar. The light started to fly when they got closer as they attempted to chase it, soaring around, tailing the mysterious floating light for upwards of 2 hours, intermittently losing sight of the target completely, occasionally getting blips on the radar, until eventually the trail went cold, and as quickly as it had appeared, the strange light had disappeared. People on the ground reported seeing that light all over that day, and to date, no one truly knows what had happened. Number 2. The Travis Walton Incident. Now, our next story is a wild one even by top 5 standards, but that's exactly why I wanted to include it. Our story starts in November 1975, and I'm pretty sure that's the third one of these that took place in November. It's a weird month for aliens, huh? Travis Walton was working as a forester, and the day was passing normally. Walton and his co-workers from the logging crew were riding in a truck, 7 men total, when they encountered a flying saucer-like object hovering above them around 100 feet in the air, making a loud, high-pitched droning noise. The truck stopped, and Walton left the vehicle to get a closer look at the unidentified flying object. And suddenly, a bright light surrounded the truck and knocked Walton back and unconscious. Terrified, the other men drove off. Walton then goes on to claim that when he awoke, he was no longer in the forest on the ground, but was in a bright, silvery, hospital-like room being observed by 3 short, bald creatures, very similar to the Allagash abduction story. He says that he struggled as much as he could against his captors until he was met with a tall creature that closely resembled a human, but was wearing an intimidating helmet. The masked creature escorted Walton to another room and put a translucent mask over his face, and he blacked out. Walton says the next thing he can accurately remember is walking alongside a highway 5 days later. The thing is, Walton really was missing for 5 days. There was a search. Scent dogs and helicopters were used to track him over the woods, and he was assumed to have passed. For 5 full days, he was completely untraceable until one day he just reappeared. Since that fateful week in 1975, Travis has sworn that what happened to him was an abduction, even if it just seemed like a bad dream. His story served as the basis for the 90s horror film Fire Fell from the Sky, so if you're looking for a dramatization of this story, good one to check out. And number 1, the Rendlesham Incident. It's sometimes referred to as Great Britain's Roswell. The Rendlesham Incident is a very noticeable case in UFO sighting history. On December 26, 1980, there was a series of vivid, bright flashing lights flying over Rendlesham Forest in Suffolk, England. 2 U.S. Army personnel, John Burroughs and Jim Penniston, were stationed at local Air Force bases and were alerted by these strange lights, worrying that it could have been a threat. The younger of the 2 men, Mr. Burroughs, said that the lights looked like a beacon flashing all sorts of colors. Over 40 personnel stationed at the Air Force base corroborated this claim. The 2 men got clearance to investigate whatever was flashing over Rendlesham Forest. In their official document to their superiors, the 2 men write that they saw a strange, glowing, metallic triangular object hanging in the sky, pulsing with colored lights. Neither of the men had any idea what it was they were witnessing. The craft seemed far more advanced than anything either of them had ever seen, and seemed not of this world. As if that wasn't compelling evidence enough, neighboring farm animals were all in a frenzy as this thing was flying, and the airmen's equipment started malfunctioning. The personnel could no longer use their radio to contact the base. Landing in the middle of the clearing in the forest was a craft unlike either of them had ever seen. It was black, triangular, and made out of smooth, opaque glass. No windows or landing gear. It didn't look like anything either of these trained servicemen had ever seen. Penniston describes there being hieroglyphic-like symbols etched onto the shell of the vessel, although they were far too cryptic for him to understand. The craft took off, changing the lives of those men together. And it wouldn't even be the last sighting of the Rendlesham UFO, because not even 2 days later, the same strange lights were seen flying overhead the forest again. This time, coming prepared, crews set out with Geiger counters to follow up on whatever was flying around them. The patrol found their way to the landing site Penniston and Burroughs had described and found several depressions in the ground, all setting off the Geiger counter for radioactivity. And lo and behold, above them was those same flashing lights that had been taunting them 2 nights before, disappearing into the skies. 40 years later, and we're still no closer to understanding what happened in the Rendlesham Incident. Number 5. Well, first and foremost, if you were looking for any proof that the government definitely knows more about aliens than they let on, how about from the mouth of the 3-letter organizations themselves? The CIA released a tweet in 2014, obviously was meant to be taken in a joking manner, but still pretty illuminating, saying that throughout the 50s and 60s, they estimate that 50% of all sightings of unexplained aerial phenomena phenomena and UFOs were simply the CIA testing new aircraft. Out of context, the CIA admits they were behind 50% of all UFO sightings is an extremely attention-grabbing headline, and probably what I should have named this video. Would have got you to click better. And it is an attention-grabbing headline. At the time they were testing the Lockheed U-2 spy plane, codenamed Dragon Lady, which was able to fly at altitudes thought unreachable by a one-manned aircraft at the time. We know the CIA will always be a little bit more technologically advanced than they're willing to let on. That's just the nature of shadowy governments. But the conspiracy theorist in me has to wonder, is it even just the littlest bit possible that them releasing this could be a misinformation campaign? I mean, this is just what they're willing to admit, right? Who's to say what they won't admit? What if they put stuff like this out there so the next time you see something odd in the sky, you just dismiss it thinking, oh, that's just the CIA testing airplanes, instead of the more logical, reasonable answer that it's an alien spacecraft observing you from up above. And what if all I'm saying is just wild speculating and tinfoil hat level conspiracies because I'm trying to get views on video? It's more likely than you think. But them admitting they're responsible for most UFO sightings intones to me that they're aware of a lot more UFO sightings that are reported. Makes you wonder how much they research them all. Do you think they look at every blurry cell phone camera video posted to Reddit, or just the really serious ones that make the news? I'm hoping to get some answers someday, and I have a feeling that some of those answers are in this video. It won't all be wild speculation, I promise. And hey, if you want to see more alien stuff, click through. We've got boxes full of declassified documents, NASA stories, and videos that are just out of this world. Get it? So stay subscribed and stay scared, and I'll see you there. Number 4, the Guy Hoddle memo. So it's a pretty much an open book secret that the three-letter agencies have known about aliens in some way or another since they've started writing things down. They don't hide it or pretend to hide it anymore, which is nice. They finally admitted that Area 51 even exists for the first time a couple years ago, so we could all use a little openness in our day-to-day. Let's take a look at one of the FBI's most talked about and most viewed documents, the Guy Hoddle memo. And despite being one of the most seen FBI memos, it's but a single-page document that was never followed up on. Well, it sounds like we should follow up on it. Guy Hoddle was the head of the FBI field office in Washington, and his report was addressed to the head of the FBI, one J. Edgar Hoover. The contents of the report were simple, but shocking. It detailed the descriptive encounter of an agent making a physical sighting of what they believed to be a UFO. It's dated 3 years after the Roswell incident, but it was reported in New Mexico for what it's worth. Here's a quote from the memo. The saucers were described as being circular in shape with raised centers, approximately 50 feet in diameter. Each one was occupied by 3 bodies of human shape, but only 3 feet tall, dressed in metallic cloth of a very fine texture. Each body was bandaged in a manner similar to blackout suits used by speed flyers and test pilots. Now, if you ask me, that is almost too perfect, isn't it? I mean, the memo lines up nearly perfectly with the stereotypical, cartoon description of aliens being little gray or green men flying around in flying saucers around New Mexico. The memo goes on to read that the agent claims they had found the saucers because an FBI high-powered radar in the area had detected it, and this radar detecting it had interfered with the controlling mechanism of the crafts. But despite all of this, which really seems like it's the paper trail screaming, proving, hey, aliens are out there, you should go check them out, the memo ends by saying no further evaluation was attempted, and the Hoddle memo was never followed up on, presumably crumpled up and thrown away. Director Hoover, I guess, thought it wasn't worth his time and disregarded it, leaving it now as nothing more than an incredibly odd piece of history. Number 3, Project Blue Book. Well, here's the thing. Even if Director Hoover at the FBI didn't see fit to look into the Hoddle memo, there were definitely other organizations that were looking into UFOs. Maybe it's not just the FBI, but I can tell you that the Air Force sure was. If you're an experienced UFO enthusiast, perhaps you're already very familiar with Project Blue Book, but if you're not, hey, let's talk about it. The project was officially started in 1952 and terminated in 1969. And the project had 2 main goals. 1. Confirm if UFOs were a threat to national security. And 2. Scientifically analyze any UFO-related data. Well, that seems like pretty strong evidence to me. Not that the project existed to see if UFOs are real, but rather to determine if they were a threat. That seems like they're writing and admitting no, we know, we just want to know if they're scary. And is that not the most human sentiment you've ever heard? If you guys learned nothing from Avatar, we gotta be making friends with aliens, not being afraid of them. In the years of Project Blue Book's operations, a stunning 12,618 reports were filed and collected. And those are just the ones that are officially recorded. Of those, interestingly, there were an individual 700 reports that were found to be unexplainable after research and intense analysis. Isn't that Interesting. Now, a great number of these reports turned out to be the U-2 spy plane that we mentioned all the way back in point number 5, if you remember that far away. But that still leaves 700 completely unexplained sightings of aircraft that the USAF looked into and could not find answers for. The project was ultimately shut down in 1969, with the official explanation being given that, number 1, no UFO reported, investigated, and evaluated by the Air Force has ever given any indication of threat to our national security. And number 2, there has been no evidence submitted to or discovered by the Air Force that sightings categorized as unidentified represent technological developments or principles beyond the range of present-day scientific knowledge. And number 3, there has been no evidence indicating the sightings categorized as unidentified are extraterrestrial vehicles. Oh, well that sounds like kind of a bit of a bummer, doesn't it? They went through thousands of documents and declared that none of it was worthwhile evidence to suggest that aliens exist. Well, it's a shame that we're never going to mention any more things of the Air Force on this video, or any more things about pilots encountering aliens. I mean, that really blows. I mean, except for our next point. Take a listen. Number 2, the UAP report. Very recently, the Pentagon declassified a series of documents known internally as the UAP report, and it was basically the sequel to Project Blue Book, the streaming follow-up. And yeah, every single time we have an alien video, I'm probably going to have a little meltdown where I talk about how last year the government confirmed that they researched UFOs and that's what they spend your money on, and no one seemed to care about this, they just slipped it under the rug. I guess we were kind of busy with other stuff, but still. What happened to our curious minds, people? We learned that the various three-letter agencies in the States had been researching, analyzing, and scouting out sightings of UFOs, mostly because pilots just could not stop reporting them during training ops. One pilot, Lieutenant Ryan Graves, claims that he saw hundreds, maybe thousands in his career as a Navy pilot. One of the more famous ones is the Tic Tac sighting, referring to a massive oval-shaped aircraft that was spotted by 2 pilots. This one comes from 2004, and the 2 veteran pilots, Commander David Fravor and Lieutenant Commander Jim Slate, were the ones who called it in. 2 respected, trustworthy Navy veterans. Their report reads that the objects were spotted almost out of nowhere, some 80,000 feet in the air, which would then descend rapidly towards the Pacific Ocean, then stop at around 2,000 feet and hover in place. Very normal airplane behavior. They would drop out of radar range or shoot directly up into the sky on a 90-degree angle. For weeks, Navy crew was watching these objects trying to determine just what they were. They certainly weren't American in origin, and they weren't recognized by any other organizations. To confirm what they'd seen, Slate and Fravor were sent off on a reconnaissance mission to get eyes on it. What they found was more confusing than either of the 2 men could ever have imagined. They reported back that the object they were seeing was like a giant Tic Tac, white-colored, oval-shaped, and 40 feet long. Far too big to be a drone, and it didn't maneuver in a way like an aircraft would, making erratic movements, staying out of reach of radars, as if it knew it was trying to stay undetected. The pilots flew towards a rendezvous point to touch down, and presumably cracked their windows open and asked each other, hey, what the hell was that? But as they flew towards the LZ, the UAP flew past them at a breakneck speed and then disappeared entirely. When questioned about it, Fravor said that it was unlike any aircraft he had ever seen in his life. I mean, that guy flew planes like every day for years, so he probably knows a thing or two. Number 1, non-terrestrial officers. Now, if you're like me, you're probably frustrated that you know the truth is so close within grasp behind closed doors. To know in your heart of hearts that there are answers to the unexplained just out of sight would drive you to do something crazy. Now, for most of us, all we can do is sit and speculate and maybe watch some lovely top 5 videos of a very handsome host talking about aliens. But for one Gary McKinnon, a Scottish computer programmer, he decided that wasn't enough and decided to take matters into his own hands. McKinnon was a genius computer hacker and had his sights set on the biggest prize he could imagine, going after NASA's servers to see if they had any hidden alien data just waiting to be found, in what was described as the biggest military hack of all time. Quite the conversation starter. Why would anyone risk their career, freedom, and livelihood on this? Well, Gary wanted the truth and he would do anything to get it. McKinnon claims he had insider knowledge that confirmed the US had suppressed anti-gravity technology reverse engineered from UFOs and free energy. In his own statement, McKinnon said, "This should not be kept hidden from the public when pensioners can't even pay their fuel bills." Yeah. Well, so what did McKinnon find? Well, he didn't find proof of the reverse-engineered UFOs that he'd been hoping for, but he found quite a lot that was remarkably illuminating. First up, a 400-page document called the Disclosure Project, outlining testimonials from government agents across multiple branches of service, reporting all their sightings and scientific analysis on unexplained flying objects. That would already be pretty impressive, but on top of that, McKinnon also managed to find a document entitled Non-Terrestrial Officers. Non-Terrestrial Officers? What? What? Is that just fancy talk for astronaut? Well, the document was a spreadsheet listing the names of NASA officers and employees who were to be transferred to new ships or to serve on board space stations. But here's where it gets weird. McKinnon noted that the names of these vessels listed did not appear to exist in any other database. And if that wasn't enough, McKinnon claims in his searching he saw images of aircraft that did not resemble anything he had ever seen. One in particular he describes as looking like a massive cigar-shaped craft floating over the northern hemisphere that did not look man-made. One wonders if that's the same as the Tic Tac ship. He said he was in a shock looking at the image and didn't think to take a photo. Now, after pulling off an unbelievable fast one on NASA, McKinnon couldn't resist a bit of cheeky cyber vandalism and edited NASA's website homepage with a bit of text that read, "Your security is crap, by the way." Now, I'm not endorsing hacking a government website, but that's one of the coolest things I've ever read. Now, I don't know how much you know about the United States government. Boy, do they just love it when you prove to them that they have a massive security breach in their most classified data. Presumably the only thing that kept McKinnon from being strapped to a car battery and thrown into a black van by the men in black was the fact that he lived in Scotland and was kind of hard to get a hold of. He was arrested by UK police, and the United States government tried their absolute hardest to have him extradited to the States to be tried for the fullest extent of his crimes. Honestly, I bet it was the note. I bet that's what really pushed them over the edge. McKinnon managed to avoid extradition and was protected by the Crown for serving out what would have been a 70-year sentence. But presumably he's not planning any road trips to the States anytime soon, and I'm sure NASA has improved their security just a little bit. Number 5. Strange things in the skies. Now, I know I talked about this in a previous video, and if you're a really good Top 5 Scary fan, maybe you'll recognize some of these. But since I aired that last video, way more weird stuff has happened, so it only seems fitting that we'd run through it once again. Starting on February 10th, yours truly's birthday by the way, there was a pattern of incredibly bizarre happenings in the skies, and some very, very dodgy answers from government officials who refused to confirm or deny anything, which always seems more suspicious than less. So here's a quick Cole's Notes play-by-play of the last few weeks. On February 10th, US fighter jets brought down a still unidentified object over the coast of Alaska. Now, this object has not been confirmed what it is at all or identified, but it's been confirmed as not being a balloon. Okay, that's one thing, only 1 million left to go. One official referred to it as being the size of a small car, which is definitely beyond strange. You think you would see that flying around? This single event would probably be enough to set tinfoil hats on fire and keep me in business for the next few years making videos about conspiracies, but the literal next day on February 11th, a UFO was shot down over Canada, around the Yukon. That's the big territory up on the left, right by Alaska. A US fighter jet downed this one, and it was described as being smaller than the first and cylindrical in nature, which is gonna come up a few times before this video is done, so hold on to that thought, there's still more. February 12th, we had something bizarre shot down over Lake Huron. An object that first appeared over Montana reappeared on Sunday before being shot down with an octagonal structure and strings hanging off of it, but it wasn't carrying anything, which is bizarre. And then over Billings, Montana, there was something very bizarre that was seen falling from the sky, leaving a thick orange chemtrail, and residents were left in the dark about it. Local residents wondered just what it was, and some Redditors in a group noticed around the area that there had been an increased military presence since the sighting. So just what is going on around here, there, and just about everywhere? But if you can't wait at all, and you just want to watch alien videos all day, I agree with you. That's what I do every single day, and it's a great way to live. We've got loads of alien and UFO vids, NASA conspiracies, all the things they don't want you to know. And if that ain't your jam, we got scary stories, horror movies, monsters, cryptids, true crime, just about everything spooky under the sun and above it. So stay subscribed to Top 5 Scary, but most importantly, stay scared. And keep watching this video, because I got way more weird stuff coming up for you. Number 4, the Tom DeLonge sighting. If you're a UFO enthusiast, then you know that one of the leading names in UFO research and discovery right now is Tom DeLonge, the nasally voiced frontman for pop punk project Blink-182. And if you didn't know that, now you do. Although I suspect most of the people who watch our videos don't know that band. Anyway, little trivia for you. That's what he does when he's not selling out $300 concerts. He hunts aliens, and he's pretty good at it. If some of the footage he gathers is anything to go by, why don't you take a look at this weird footage he shared on his Instagram a couple days ago. It's gonna go right there. Pretty darn weird, huh? If that isn't one of the most clear close encounters I've ever seen, I'm not sure what is. You can practically like trace the outline of the flying saucer. It looks like the platonic flying saucer, like the one we all imagine when we close our eyes. I can almost see the little green man inside. On his Instagram, DeLong wrote this caption: "Enjoy. They are real." To the Stars Media will be turning real events like these into major feature films and television series to bring the facts to the world. Note the whirling sound from the propulsion. Now, To the Stars is the fringe research company owned by Tom DeLong, hoping to spread information and explore the possibility of UFOs and UAPs, and it does also sound like it's a plan to get Tom DeLong some more money by making a cinematic alien universe. Whatever his endgame is though, can't deny the footage posted here is eerily compelling. Number 3, Gary McKinnon. Now, I've talked a bit about Gary McKinnon before on this channel because I am obsessed with this story. He's a notorious hacker who broke into NASA's security. His story is a cool one. I love anytime you hear someone pulling a fast one over a government agency like this, so it bears repeating. He's a genius computer hacker with a lot of spare time and wanted to know just what the Yanks were hiding from his home in Scotland. He wanted to go after NASA's data server to see if they had anything hidden they'd never told anybody about. Been called the biggest military hack of all time, so I'd wager maybe he found something. Why risk your life, career, freedom on this exactly? McKinnon claims he had received an insider tip that the US had reverse engineered technology from UFOs, free energy. In his own words, he said, "This should not be kept hidden from the public when pensioners can't even pay their fuel bills. And it's just like a bonus if you get some alien stuff on the side." So what did he find? McKinnon claims in his searching he saw images of aircraft that did not resemble any he had ever seen in his life. One in particular he describes as looking like a massive cigar-shaped craft floating over the northern hemisphere that did not look man-made. He said he was in shock looking at the image and didn't think to take a photo. Well, there's those cylindrical shaped crafts again. I told you to keep thinking about them, and keep thinking about them again because they're going to show up one more time before this video is done. Well, that wasn't the only exciting thing he found. He also found something called the Disclosure Project, a 400-page document outlining testimonials from government agents across multiple branches of service recording sightings of unidentified objects, but that wasn't even the meal ticket. The real jewel was a document of a non-terrestrial officer's sheet. A spreadsheet listing the name of NASA agents to be transferred to new ships or serve on board space stations, but McKinnon noted that none of the names of the vessels existed in any database. Now, I don't know how much you know about the US government, but they absolutely love it when you poke holes in their important security, triply so if you do it from the comfort of your bedroom in a country away. The US tried their level best to extradite McKinnon, but were prevented by the Crown from serving out a 70-year sentence. McKinnon is doing well. He recently took to the UFO subreddit to answer questions from fans and true believers. There wasn't a whole lot of new information, but it's just nice to know he hasn't been shoved into a black van somewhere. Number 2, the Navy and their pilots, Navy pilots. In September 2019, Navy spokesperson Joe Gradisher spoke out on 3 recently released videos by the Army that contained evidence of unexplained aerial phenomena. The Navy agreed that just this once, they would be willing to talk about something weird they'd seen and recorded because pilots are reportedly encountering bizarre things every day and feel just too uncomfortable to report it. One pilot in particular, Ryan Graves, who's a 10-year vet, has said he believes he's seen thousands of unexplained phenomena in the air in his career, but these go unreported because of the stigma attached to the previous theories about what may or may not be in the videos, in his words. To translate that a bit in layman's terms, the Navy feels that they have to comment so that pilots are willing to talk about that, hey, maybe we're seeing UFOs without feeling too crazy. These videos in question were released from 2017 to 2018, and they feature long, oblong-shaped objects captured with infrared that disappear in the Earth's atmosphere. Hey, there it is again, more cylindrical-shaped UFOs. Now, I'll be clear, I don't really have much of a connection or through line here, but I do think it's very fascinating how many of these stories do mention these cylindrical-shaped objects. Far from the earliest or last, in 2004 and in 2015, 2 similar sightings were reported featuring similar similar vehicles. Now, the purpose of investigating most of these reports is more focused on safety hazards and threats of national security. And at the same time, maybe they're not openly admitting they've got UFOs flying around, but they're getting pretty darn close. The 2004 sighting, I think, is a particularly fascinating one. Two pilots, one Commander Fravor and one Lieutenant Commander Slate, called it in, reporting that they saw objects out of nowhere at some 80,000 feet in the air, and then descending rapidly towards the Pacific Ocean, stopping at around 20,000 feet and hovering in place. They would drop out of radar range or shoot directly up in the sky on a 90-degree angle. You know, normal things aircrafts love to do. They weren't American crafts, and they weren't recognized by any organizations they'd ever seen. Maybe it's tech not of this world. Number 1, government councils. You know, the era we're in right now is probably one of the most fascinating times to be invested in UFOs and unexplained alien sightings, so consider yourself lucky, because it seems like we are getting dangerously close to a government finally confessing it. It feels like we're weeks away some days, you know? The UAP report was a seminal turning point when the Pentagon outright admitted they had thousands of documents and reports and investigations into the possibility of life somewhere out there in the Milky Way. Over the years, there have been a few investigations into unexplained aerial phenomena, but they're usually pretty hush-hush clandestine. Project Blue Book is probably the most famous secret project among them, but that was, you know, a secret. Well, in the interest of transparency, as of October 2022, NASA is coming clean, washing their hands, and opening a new study into the research of extraterrestrial life. 16 hand-picked scientists and specialists have been selected to analyze data and determine how best to go forward when observing events. And they're not really looking at past cases, they're more looking towards future things. And this project will include researchers, personnel from all divisions, including former astronaut Scott Kelly, who served as the pilot for the Discovery shuttle and also held the world record for most days in space. So I guess he probably knows one or two things about space, maybe, and I'm sure he's seen something weird. Kelly himself doesn't personally believe in aliens, saying, "I think there's probably intelligent life in the universe, but I don't think they visit planet Earth." Why not? We got lots of great stuff out here. We got water slides, we got Vin Diesel. No other planet has those two things, and I'm sure we got a couple other great things from the human experience, so aliens, come on down when you're ready. We'll welcome you with open arms, and if those were UFOs you sent, we're really sorry that we shot those down. I didn't have anything to do with that.
Starting off in our number 5 spot, we have the alleged cover-up of unidentified aerial phenomena, or UAPs. David Grush, a veteran intelligence officer who has served with the Air Force and the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, recently brought forth serious allegations of a cover-up concerning UAP, more commonly referred to as UFOs. These claims were made during his testimony before the House Oversight Committee's National Security Subcommittee, suggesting a potentially significant obstruction of transparency within the government's executive branch agencies. Grush's experience with UAPs is extensive. He has served 14 years as a military intelligence officer, part of which involved serving on 2 Pentagon task forces dedicated to investigating these anomalous phenomena. This placed him in a very unique position to access classified programs and information, offering him an insider's view into the government's interactions with UAPs. During the hearing, Grush declared that Congress, the very institution responsible for comprehensive legislative oversight, is being intentionally kept uninformed about these unexplained occurrences. His assertion implies that significant UAP-related data, observations, and discoveries have been methodically obscured from the legislative branch of the government for years. Grush's testimony went beyond mere information withholding. He unveiled allegations of a covert operation that has spanned multiple decades, centered on the retrieval and reverse engineering of crashed UAPs. Reverse engineering involves deconstructing a captured technology to understand its mechanisms and potentially replicate or advance upon its design. This revelation implies the existence of potentially groundbreaking technological advancements kept secret from the public and Congress alike. If these allegations hold, the cover-up would represent a significant circumvention of the checks and balances system, essentially keeping Congress, responsible for military oversight, oblivious to potentially monumental national security measures. The details of this alleged cover-up remain unclear due to the classified nature of the information. However, Grush's claims have sparked a very necessary dialogue regarding transparency, the need for thorough investigation, and Congress's role in overseeing such investigations. In our number 4 spot today, we have non non-human origins and biologics. If you've heard anything about the meeting, it's likely this, because everyone is talking about it. During the course of his testimony, David Grush presented some particularly startling allegations. He asserted that his extensive work in intelligence and the investigation of UAPs had led him to officials who purportedly held direct knowledge of aircrafts of non-human origins. This claim fundamentally challenges the predominant understanding of human technological capabilities and opens up a Pandora's box of questions concerning the existence and potential involvement of extraterrestrial life in these unexplained phenomena. One thing that they said in the hearing that I liked is, "We're not talking about little green men and flying saucers. We are talking about technology and capabilities that we don't even understand, let alone have access to." Grush's assertion implies that the US government is privy to technology that originates from non-human sources, a revelation with profound implications. It suggests that these unidentified aircraft, moving in ways that defy our current understanding of physics and aerodynamics, may not just be unexplained anomalies. Instead, they could represent the tangible existence of superior extraterrestrial technologies hidden away and potentially studied in secret by governmental agencies. Adding more layers to this enigmatic situation, Grush mentioned the recovery of entities termed biologics from some of these unearthly crafts. While the term biologics typically refers to medicinal products derived from natural sources, such as humans, animals, and microorganisms in the medical field, in this context it's safe to assume that it implies biological entities of non-human origin. However, Grush didn't elaborate on the nature, characteristics, or implications of these so-called biologics, leaving much room for speculation. These revelations, if validated, could potentially reframe our understanding of life beyond Earth and our technological potential. Unsurprisingly, these assertions raised a lot of questions among the congressional members present at the hearing. They seemed increasingly ready to challenge the veil of secrecy surrounding UAPs and UFOs. Grush's claims have highlighted the dire need for increased transparency and more detailed investigations on the subject. Congress's increasing willingness to delve deeper into these matters suggests a shifting paradigm in how UAPs are approached at the governmental level. The potential for unveiling secrets about non-human technology and life forms could have far-reaching implications, not only for scientific and technological advancement, but also for our understanding of our place in the universe. In our number 3 spot today, we have the witness accounts of UAP encounters. Since David Grush first came out publicly with his claims, we have spoken about him extensively on this channel, but there's a couple other incredible people who we discuss a lot here on Top 5 Scary, who also happened to be present at the hearing and had some very compelling witness testimonies. The hearing was further enriched by testimonies from 2 former fighter pilots, Ryan Graves and David Fravor. Both of these individuals had credible military backgrounds, and they detailed their first-hand encounters with UAPs, bringing to the fore an experiential human dimension to this unfolding enigma. Ryan Graves, who served as an F-18 pilot, recounted detecting unknown objects on multiple occasions during his time in service. His account resonated with the peculiar nature of UAPs, objects that defy conventional understanding of aerial maneuverability and speed. Graves' report echoed concerns around the frequency of UAP sightings by military personnel and underscored the vital question of airspace safety. Furthermore, his experiences cast light on the fact these encounters are not isolated events, but rather a recurring phenomenon that requires thorough investigation. David Fravor, another former fighter pilot, contributed his own chilling encounter with an unexplained object off the California coast in 2004. His recounting of the event, often referred to as the Tic Tac UFO sighting due to the object's unusual shape, has been one of the most publicized accounts of UAP encounters to date. Fravor's description of the object, its sudden unimaginable acceleration, and its ability to instantaneously halt at will challenges the boundaries of our known laws of physics. His story highlighted the extraordinary characteristics of these phenomena and heightened the urgency to explore their origins and their implications. Notably, both witnesses expressed deep dissatisfaction with the existing systems for reporting UAP encounters within the military. They critiqued the current protocols as being insufficient and unresponsive to the seriousness and frequency of these encounters. Their frustrations underscored the need for more comprehensive, systematic approach to documenting, investigating, investigating and addressing UAP sightings. Moreover, Graves and Fravor shed light on less discussed but equally important aspects of UAP encounters, the stigma associated with reporting them. Despite the high frequency of sightings by military personnel, many cases likely go unreported due to fear of ridicule or damage to one's professional reputation. This pervasive culture of silence and dismissal inhibits open dialogue and progress in understanding UAPs. Their testimonies thus underscore the need to transform the UAP conversation. A shift in cultural and procedural attitudes within the military and other relevant institutions is necessary. It's crucial to foster an environment where UAP encounters can be reported and discussed without fear of stigmatization, enabling a more holistic understanding of these phenomena, their implications, and how to best respond to them. In our number 2 spot today, we have the increased calls for transparency. Adding to the complexity of the UAP discourse, a group of senators from both sides of the aisle took an active step towards greater transparency and disclosure. They introduced an amendment to the annual defense spending bill with a clear mandate. Executive branch agencies must release all records pertaining to UAPs to a specially designated review board. This bipartisan initiative signals a significant shift in how UAP-related matters are addressed within government circles. The amendment signifies the commitment of these lawmakers to engage with the enigmatic issue of UAPs beyond partisan lines. They seek to pave the way for more open, informed dialogue on the subject, making available all relevant data and reports that have so far been held by various executive agencies. Their aim is to instill a level of accountability and ensure that the subject of UAPs is treated with the seriousness it warrants. The demand for the release of UAP records is coupled with an expectation of immediate disclosure. This stipulation emphasizes the urgency felt by the lawmakers regarding this matter. It echoes a public sentiment for greater transparency and a thirst for understanding phenomena that could have far-reaching implications for national security, aerospace technology, and even our understanding of physics. This move was fueled in part by a widespread frustration expressed by both Democratic and Republican representatives over the lack of accessible information about UAPs from the military and intelligence agencies. This frustration transcends political boundaries and signifies a shared concern among lawmakers about the potential implications of these phenomena on national security and technological dominance. These representatives pointed to an issue of overclassification, suggesting that the veil of secrecy that shrouds UAPs may be more a matter of institutional habit than of necessity. Overclassification is the practice of unnecessarily classifying documents in the name of national security, and it is a well-known problem in government, often leading to excessive secrecy, inefficiency, and a lack of accountability. The call from both Democrats and Republicans to reduce overclassification and increase transparency on the UAP issue is a strong indicator of a growing consensus in Congress. And finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have the denials and criticism of claims. The Pentagon's official stance on the subject of Grush's allegations remains conspicuously absent in the immediate aftermath of his groundbreaking testimonies. This omission follows a pattern of denials that the Department of Defense has issued in the past regarding claims of this nature, suggesting a consistent approach of refutation and skepticism. Despite the compelling nature of the evidence brought forth during the hearing, Grush's assertions were met with a degree of skepticism. Notably, some observers have posited that his claims may bear less credibility when made under oath, suggesting that the legal ramifications of perjury might have influenced the veracity of his statements. Such skepticism underscores the deeply ingrained uncertainty that surrounds the subject of UAPs, fueled by decades of secrecy, denials, and misinformation. This hesitancy to readily accept these revelations illustrates the broader challenge faced by those advocating for greater transparency and investigation into UAPs, overcoming entrenched skepticism rooted in a history of distrust. Moreover, the issue of determining the credibility of sources is further complicated in the context of UAPs. Traditionally, corroborative evidence and third-party validation are relied upon to assess the validity of claims. However, in the case of UAPs, the long-standing culture of secrecy and the potentially advanced technology involved make it challenging to apply these standards. Despite these obstacles, the hearing served to spotlight the pressing need for more comprehensive and transparent investigations into UAPs. The testimonies and the controversies they generated only underscored the necessity of further exploration of these phenomena. It is also amplified the call for the introduction of new legislation aimed at ensuring greater accountability, openness, and scientific engagement with UAPs. The possibility of future legislation to better address the UAP phenomena may well be on the horizon. Such legislation could ensure that thorough and rigorous investigations are conducted, which are free from previous biases and open to new interpretations. This legislation might mandate the establishment of a dedicated research body, ensure proper funding for in-depth investigations, and pave the way for scientific collaborations. The testimonies, debates, and skepticism arriving from this event serve as a strong indicator that the discourse surrounding UAPs is entering a new phase, one characterized by a greater demand for transparency, a willingness to explore unfamiliar scientific territories, and a collective aspiration to unravel the mysteries that have long hovered in our skies.
Number 5. The Barney and Betty Hill incident. The case of Barney and Betty Hill has puzzled UFO enthusiasts for generations and is considered one of the most well-documented, well-discussed UFO abduction stories, and also President Obama's favorite. He's making a documentary on it. In 1961, a young couple, Betty and Barney Hill, were driving home through New Hampshire when they saw a bright light flying through the sky. 2 hours later, they found themselves back in their driveway without knowing what had happened, confused, shocked, and afraid. The couple claimed that they traveled to a star system 39 light years from Earth, Zeta Reticuli. Before this point, there weren't really many widespread stories of abductions in the United States, so this story caught on wildly. As they were driving home, the couple noticed something bright in the sky. Feeling dizzy and drowsy, the two of them found themselves asleep and waking up in their driveway, completely lost as to how they got there. When they'd awoken, Betty was convinced that they'd experienced a close encounter and went to Air Force to report their sightings. They would spend the next 2 years explaining their case to various government officials and medical professionals. Mr. Barney Hill would go on to recount to a psychiatrist that he was having nightmarish, repetitive dreams. He would recall these creatures with slanted eyes and gray skins that took them on board and experimented on them by taking samples of their flesh and hair. The two underwent hypnosis therapy from a licensed psychologist in a hopes to uncover what they could have experienced and repressed. And shockingly, Betty Hill was able to draw a map of the stars seemingly from memory, a planet orbiting Zeta Reticuli. The map was nearly spot on, a near perfect recreation of the stars surrounding the actual solar system. This event would end up leading to the Air Force launching Project Blue Book, the clandestine program to research UFO and abduction stories and investigate just what's out there. And if you're looking for more UFO content, even stuff on Project Blue Book, we've got all of that and then some. Come take a look through at all the declassified files, stories of abductions, sightings, close encounters, and way more. So stay subscribed, stay scared, but more importantly, stay watching this video. I worked hard on it. We got lots more abduction stories coming up for you in just a second. Number 4, Terrell Copeland. For some, too many abduction stories come from a disreputable source, you know? Well, our next story comes from a former United States Marine, Terrell Copeland. A man who'd seen the brink and back and had never been shook like this before in his life. Pop those ears open and take a listen. Copeland reported this in 2007. He was living in his Virginia apartment when he saw an orb of white light across the street and hovering in the air, some 300 meters above the ground and changing colors rapidly. Now, Terrell had the same reaction most people like you and I might have seeing a glowing, colorful disco ball in the sky, and he thought, well, that's kind of weird, something's wrong. So he recorded it, posted footage online, and claims this is where his life took a dark turn. He was taking a nap in his apartment, and he said it sounded as if someone was breaking in. He called out into the darkness, asking who was invading his space, and he saw the doorknob move and heard scratching at his door. He grabbed a firearm that he kept in his apartment and went to go ready it, but found himself completely frozen, unable to move no matter how bad he wanted to. He claims he heard a voice that spoke to him, internally, as if it was his own thoughts, saying, "You don't need to do that. We won't harm you." I'm pretty sure if I heard that from inside my head, I would leap out my window just to be safe and take my chances somersaulting down the road because I'm probably safer there. Now, doctors thought this incident was sleep paralysis, a condition in which one can experience vivid auditory and visual hallucinations during a period of insomnia and even freeze up. But Copeland would complain of hours missing that he couldn't remember. He said there was a span of about 4 hours over the course of 2 nights that he couldn't remember a single second of. So Copeland began to keep notes and sketches of his memories as he started to have these blocked memories resurfacing. He claimed that he saw a person with an elongated skull and pitch black eyes and said he had a vivid memory of standing on a balcony waving at a cylinder-shaped ship. On a positive note for all of this, Copeland says that he doesn't believe this incident has haunted him, but feels that it's made him a better person and asking more questions, and it's definitely given him a story to tell at parties. Number 3. Frederick Valentich. Frederick Valentich was an Australian pilot. He was well trained, and he was an avid enthusiast of UFOs and extraterrestrials. Lucky for him, he might have seen one. Sadly for him, it was the last time anyone saw him. It was 1978, and Frederick disappeared over his 125 nautical mile training flight over the Australian mainland. While at 4,500 feet in the air, Valentich reported that there was an unidentifiable craft following behind him. Melbourne Flight Services insisted that there wasn't any other aircraft in the space with him, but Frederick replied back, "No, there's something on my tail." He described it as glowing with 4 repeating bright lights and rushing past him. Valentich said it was shiny, metallic, and chrome, and he was on radio with air control for 5 minutes before he started mysteriously experiencing engine trouble. The flight controller asked him again what was following him. Valentich responded, "It's hovering and it is not an aircraft." And this was the last thing anyone ever heard from Frederick Valentich. Authorities were completely unable to recover his craft, and after an intense search, threw their shoulders up at a loss. A local farmer alleged that he had seen a strange flying object in the sky the same day as Valentich's disappearance. The farmer went on to explain that he claims he saw the plane attached to this UFO. He told officials that he was scared to tell anyone about what he had seen for fear he would be the town laughingstock if he was a farmer raving about a UFO. Tragically, in the end, we're no closer to understanding what happened to Frederick now than we were all those years ago in 1978. Did Frederick get his wish? Did he get to see an alien up close? Did they take him back to the stars? Or who knows? And we may never know. I don't know. Number 2. Travis Walton. Alien abduction stories can be a little much sometimes. I'm sure you can agree. Even for those with very open minds, you know, they all seem kind of the same, and usually you can poke holes through them and find all the little weird details that don't add up. Well, take a listen to this one. Travis Walton's story is one of the most famous abduction examples on record. You might be familiar with it before if you study UFO stuff a lot. I've covered it a few times on this channel before because I think it is one of the most fascinating abduction stories. So let's hear it. In 1975, Travis Walton was working as a logger on an otherwise unremarkable day. And he was with 6 other loggers driving around in the forest when they saw something incredibly bright shining at them through the treetops. One of the men claimed that it looked like a flattened saucer. Walton stepped out of the truck to investigate and was struck by some invisible force that had knocked him backward. This startled the rest of the crew, who drove off in a flurry. And it's a great way to find out who your real friends are. Your real friends are not the guys who leave you in the woods where you're about to get abducted. I wouldn't do that to you. When the crew returned, Walton had vanished. Travis awoke and had thought that he'd been taken to a hospital because suddenly he found himself in a blindingly bright, sterile room and could hear people moving around him. But it wasn't until he got a good look at his doctors that he realized something was very wrong. 3 feet tall, brown quarter-sized pupils, and marshmallow-like skin. Walton freaked out, I think as most of us probably would do, and was restrained by his captors. He fought them off, but was greeted by a tall creature that he said resembled human, but was masked by an intimidating helmet, kind of a Darth Vader deal. This masked creature took Walton and escorted him back into the operating room, put a translucent mask over his face, while Walton drifted out of consciousness over and over again, unsure if anything that was happening was real. The next thing he remembers is walking alongside a highway as if nothing had ever happened. He eventually found his way to a phone and called for his brother-in-law, who panically asked what had happened. It turned out that Walton had been gone for 5 days. He was untraceable. Search parties had formed looking for him, sent dogs and choppers, tracked him from the woods, but no one could find any sign of him, as if he'd blinked right out of existence, and then blinked right back. Travis swore what happened to him was absolutely real, an abduction, and he's maintained this ever since that fateful week in 1975. Now, if you really think this story is fascinating, and you wish you could have seen some footage of what Travis described, unfortunately he didn't bring his camcorder. You can, however, watch a 90s movie directly based off the case called Fire in the Sky. It's on Amazon Prime or something, I'm sure. And finally, number 1, the Berkshire incident. Now here's the thing with most UFO sightings. They're isolated scenarios, you know? One sleep-deprived night watchman sees something weird out the corner of his eye. Somebody up way too late sees something up in the sky. It's hard to believe just one person's story. That's why it's significantly harder to write off the experience of Berkshire County, where half the town reported seeing the same UFO. Uncanny and unprecedented. 200 150 residents and more all reported seeing the same UFOs flying across the night sky. So it was 1969. Multiple residents across town spotted blinding lights above Sheffield in the southern Berkshires. Witnesses reported that the lights they saw were beaming from saucers, bright lights onto the horizon. Some residents said that they felt that time was slowing down as they watched the object, claiming that it left them frozen and stunned, wondering just what it was they were looking at. One witness comes from a young student, one Thomas Reed, who said that he saw one of the floating entities, a glowing orb, dashing outside the forest. He claims he heard an eruption of crickets and frogs and a loud deafening sound, and then inexplicably 2 hours had passed without anyone understanding why or how. His mother and grandmother had switched car seats as well. Now, as an adult, Thomas Reed claims that over time his family has corroborated what had happened to them. He speaks of being in this immensely large, almost infinitely spanning metal hangar with hallways and hallways stretching out forever. Thomas Reed took a polygraph test telling this story and was found to be 99.1% truthful. Multiple people across Berkshire that day reported similar stories: balls of light, flying saucers, losses of time, finding themselves somewhere they couldn't explain. The residents of Berkshire may never get to the bottom of what happened there, but I know the truth is out there.
In 5th place today, we have the footage the Pentagon refuses to release from Alaska. Between the dates of February 4th to the 12th of 2023, 4 different unidentified objects were shot down over Alaska, South Carolina, the Yukon, and the Great Lakes. While cockpit audio from F-16 pilots who shot down the UFOs over Lake Huron was released, a spokesman for the Pentagon has confirmed that the footage will not be released in the near future, being quoted directly saying, "I can tell you that there is not currently any images or video footage that we can release. The imagery remains classified, and I have not received any information as to the potential timeline on a change in classification." This refusal is a drastic difference in comparison to the quick release of an Air Force photo of what is believed to have been a Chinese spy balloon that was shot down at the same time over on the East Coast, and footage from when a Russian plane appeared to intentionally collide with a drone last March. Noted UFO researcher John Greenwald requested the footage and photos of the UFO shootdowns be released via a Freedom of Information Act request, with the Pentagon claiming national security exemptions to deny this request. An Air Force official said that the images would reveal cryptology and national security concerns if released, and even the Canadian RCMP are playing coy, having ended their public search for the remains. Now, I don't know about y'all, but that sounds pretty dang suspicious to me. Hey, anyone want to take a random trip to the Yukon just to sightsee? Totally not to recover UFO debris or anything suspicious.
Number 4. The Observatory. In 2007, astronomer Alberto Meyer, living in Busta Arezizo, Italy, and I butchered that pronunciation, made an incredible discovery, almost completely by accident, which is where most scientific progress gets made. He was adjusting the focus of his telescope when he spotted and tracked a UFO as it flew across the surface of the moon. Now, the video shows the portions of the moon that he was focused on in close-up mode while tracking a solid black object as it flew over the surface of the moon. And look, I could just describe what is going on in this video, but I could also let you get your peepers on it and let you decide for yourself. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, so here's roughly 24,000 words worth of context. Take yourself a look. Pretty weird, huh? That round black object is tracked as he catches just after it passing the Wallace crater, and yeah, this is how I'm learning that parts of the moon were named. I didn't know there was moon geography. It hovers and hesitates before making a sudden change of path at an exact 45-degree angle. Take your protractor out. The precision and control is what's giving people pause, you know? It seems to move as if it's being controlled, and with such mechanical dominance that it seems like it has to be something that's being intentionally driven, and not just a strange rock floating through the stars, or, I'm gonna be honest, a bug crawling on the lens, which is what I thought it might be. Now, commenters on the video, because this thing went viral when it got posted, pointed out that the object does not decrease in size at all, suggesting that the object isn't close to the moon, and rules out the theory that this is a shadow on the surface of the moon from a large object overneath. I'm only capable of so much, I'm gonna be honest. The science stuff, that's kind of above my pay grade, but I can confirm and offer my speculation on when videos of UFOs look weird, and that's exactly what's going on here. So is this a UFO? Who is to say?
Alrighty, in our 3rd place position, we have the Guy Hotel Memo. It's the most requested document in the FBI's archives, right after the photo of Elvis and Nixon riding with an alien. The file has been checked out roughly 1 million times in the last 2 years alone. So far as cagey cover-ups go, this one's fairly out in the open, but that doesn't make it any less invigorating. It's single page, an unconfirmed report the FBI never even followed up on. The file in question? It's a memo dated back to March of 1950, authored by one Guy Hotel, who served as the director of the FBI field office in Washington, D.C., addressed to FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. In the memo, Hotel was relaying a story seen by an Air Force pilot about something bizarre they had seen in New Mexico, right around the time of Roswell fever. The memo describes flying saucers, circular in shape with raised centers, approximately 50 feet in diameter. It goes on to say that inside each saucer was a flight crew, each occupied by 3 bodies of roughly human shape, but only 3 feet tall, and bandaged in a manner similar to the blackout suits used by speed flyers and test pilots. The memo goes on to claim that the crafts were found because an aircraft radar had interfered with the controlling mechanisms of the saucer, and concludes by saying, no further evaluation was ever attempted. It seems like it should be a significantly bigger deal than that, no? No further evaluation? That's fine. Someone in the Air Force claims that they saw a series of flying saucers, piloted by tiny men in shiny spacesuits not even 3 years after the Roswell incident, set New Mexico news stations ablaze. But hey, it's probably nothing. At least there's some comfort in knowing that the government has always behaved like this when it comes to investigating and reporting on possible UAP and UFO sightings. Now, admittedly, there's no footage or photography of the incident to speak of, and it's a bit more government-approved hearsay. Whatever was seen on that day could have been something huge, or it could have been bogus. I suppose we'll never know, but it is worth mentioning that Project Blue Book was launched not even 2 years later, investigating UFO sightings in the Air Force, so that's all I'm gonna say on the subject.
Number 2, the Ryan Graves Report. Lieutenant Ryan Graves is a studied Air Force pilot. If you're a super big UFO enthusiast, you might even recognize the name. He's an FA-18 Super Hornet pilot who has flown the skies for 10 years and has seen countless UFOs in his time flying for the Navy, seeing all manner of things he couldn't explain. He spoke out saying, "These things would be out here all day. Keeping an aircraft in the air requires a significant amount of energy with the speeds we observed, and 12 hours in the air is about 11 hours longer than we'd expect." Now, one particular incident occurred in late 2014 when a Super Hornet pilot nearly crashed into one of these objects alongside Graves. Some of these objects were caught on plane camera, and we have got some of that footage for you here today. The pilot and his wingman were flying in tandem about 100 feet apart over the Atlantic East when something flew between them. Graves said that the object looked like a sphere encasing a cube, regular shape a plane would be. The pilots were concerned because were these things a covert drone program or something suspicious and secretive, government officials would have at least warned them, since they had fighter jets flying around for fear of collision. This was the reason the Navy was concerned that perhaps there was more to investigate with this particular encounter of unexplained aerial phenomenon. What was truly unsettling to pilots, besides the fact that there was almost a huge safety crash error there, some of that's words, right? And that was that these crafts were accelerating to hypersonic speeds, and then they would stop and turn on a dime, which is not really something that human pilots are capable of, even our best and brightest, Sorry Goose and Maverick. So what did the pilots think they were dealing with? Graves spoke out, saying, "We have helicopters that can hover. We have aircraft that can fly at 30,000 feet and right at the surface, but combine all of that into one vehicle of some type with no jet engine, no exhaust plume. So what do we think, my goblins and my ghouls? This does definitely seem like something worth digging into, doesn't it? Definitely seems suspicious, to say the least."
Finally, in first place, we have the 2004 series of spottings. On November 14th of 2004, Lieutenant Alex Dietrich was piloting her FA-18 Super Hornet when she observed an oblong object hovering over the water. It leapt into motion, skimming 500 to 1,000 feet over the waves at around 500 knots, and for those of us Canadian civilians, that's around 925 kilometers per hour. The fighter jet's onboard radar couldn't detect the object, but Alex's weapons system operator in the rear seat, who, her name's not public, witnessed it as well. Dietrich has quoted her recollection as, "We were trying to call out what we are seeing to each other and to make sure everybody else is seeing it. It's moving so erratically and so fast that our voices, our minds, and then our radio calls can't keep up with it." The majority of credible modern-day UFO sightings can be credited to those that work in the Air Force, and it should be noted that military pilots are trained at what they call REAS, short for reconnaissance, and referring more specifically in this case to the art of recognizing aircraft by their shapes, paint schemes, unit insignia, and more. On one of the other Super Hornets that launched behind Alex was Lieutenant Commander Chad Underwood, who was able to capture the object on an infrared camera. It was 40 feet long, round and smooth, and quickly received the nickname Tic Tac. Now, I'll let the footage that the US government has confirmed as authentic and unexplained speak for itself, since I know we have the clip handy. Around this time, starting on November 10th to be exact, Gary Voorhees, a petty officer on the USS Princeton guided missile cruiser, had been reporting apparitions on his radar screens in the same area, triple checking his equipment before he made his report, and being the main technician responsible for the equipment, along with having 6 years of Navy experience at the time. Voorhees described what he was seeing as impossible. In just seconds, an object had dropped to the waterline from 60,000 feet, hovered, and then zipped away at high velocity, making right-angle turns that were quoted as being confounding and defying gravity. Calm down, Wicked fans, I know what I said. The objects returned for the next week, with Voorhees quoted as saying, "I was able to see it on the horizon, during the night, and during the day, and it was definitely a glowing object. Could I tell you for 100% certainty what it was we were tracking? No. Now, footage of this event used to exist, with Gary being able to vividly describe his memories, but has since been completely scrubbed from the internet. Now, where have I heard that before?"
Starting off this list in our number 5 spot, we have Project Grudge Report 13. Okay, so I've read quite a few different UFO sighting stories and stories of alleged alien abductions, and this is fully one of the most terrifying that I have ever heard of. So basically, the story starts off in March of 1956 when Air Force Sergeant Jonathan P. Lovett was assisting Major William Cunningham in the White Sands Missile Testing Grounds near Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico. The pair were out searching for debris from a recent rocket test when Major Cunningham heard a loud scream. His first thought was that Sergeant Lovett had been bitten by a snake, so he went around to help aid his partner when he allegedly saw something he never expected. He recounted seeing the sergeant being dragged away by some sort of long serpentine arm that had wrapped around his legs. Whatever this creature was, it was connected to a hovering silver disc that was in the air about 15 feet away. The major stood there in horror as he watched this creature and the sergeant retreat into the craft, which then rose vertically into the sky. Of course, he radioed for help, and while he was taken to the hospital for observation, search teams were sent out immediately. It wouldn't happen until 3 days later that they would find the body of Sergeant Lovett, only 10 miles from the site where he was said to have disappeared from. The autopsy performed on him later also only raised more questions than answers, as his body was severely harmed. So of course there was an investigation that happened, and many people claim this investigation was detailed in a 600-page document labeled Project Grudge Report 13. But the problem with this is that no official information on Report 13 exists, and the US government denies its very existence. Though Grudge Reports 1 through 12 have been declassified along with Report 14, no official mention or accounting of Report 13 exists, and the story solely relies on secondhand accounts of the horrible incident. In our number 4 spot today, we have the cigar-shaped UFO. Okay, so let's set the stage. It's 2:45 a.m. on July 24th, 1948, and there are 20 passengers aboard a twin-engine propeller plane that is at 5,000 feet, being flown from Houston to Atlanta by pilot Clarence S. Childs and co-pilot John B. Whitted. Out of the 20 passengers on board, 19 of them are asleep at these early morning hours, and everything seems to be going as per usual until it wasn't. The 2 pilots and the 1 passenger who was awake all witnessed the same thing about 20 miles southeast of Montgomery, Alabama. About a week after the incident, the pilot explained what he had seen by saying, quote, "It was clear there were no wings present, that it was powered by some jet or other type of power shooting flame from the rear some 50 feet. There were 2 rows of windows which indicated an upper and a lower deck, and from inside these windows a very bright light was glowing. Underneath the ship there was a blue glow of light. By his estimates, he watched the UFO for about 10 seconds before it completely vanished." The co-pilot gave a similar explanation and also added, quote, "The object was cigar-shaped and seemed to be about 100 feet in length. The fuselage appeared to be about 3 times the circumference of a B-29 fuselage. It had 2 rows of windows, an upper and a lower. The windows were very large and seemed square. They were white with light, which seemed to be caused by some type of combustion. I asked Captain Childs what we had just seen, and he said that he didn't know." Well, this is obviously all very strange and peculiar. What has driven UFO enthusiasts even more is the fact that this strange sighting was of course later investigated by the US government, but the results of that investigation have allegedly been mostly destroyed. Does that mean that they found something they aren't willing to share yet? Some believe that perhaps the pilots and the passenger witnessed a secret Soviet spy craft, while others believe it was definitely something of the extraterrestrial variety. In our number 3 spot today, we have the Lubbock incident. On August 25th, 1951, in Lubbock, Texas, a group of scientists from the Texas Technical College were all hanging out in the backyard of geology professor Dr. W.I. Robinson. They were all just chilling, enjoying each other's company, until around 9:20 p.m. when they saw something very strange. It was a V-shaped formation of 15 to 30 bluish-green lights passing overhead. They were completely confused over what it could be, but figured that the lights would likely reappear, which they did. About an hour later, the lights reappeared, and at this point, all of these scientists knew that they had witnessed something exceptionally interesting, but what was it? The scientists weren't the only ones to witness the lights either. About 350 miles away in Albuquerque, New Mexico, an employee of the Atomic Energy Commission's top secret Sandia Corporation, who had a high-level Q security clearance, had been sitting outside with his wife, quote, gazing at the night sky, commenting on how beautiful it was, when both of them were startled at the sight of a huge airplane flying swiftly and silently over their home. On the aft edge of the wings, there were 6 to 8 pairs of soft, glowing bluish lights. There were more sightings as well, all reporting a similar thing. The group of scientists began investigating, tracking the lights, which they witnessed 12 more times. They measured the angle of the lights, they tracked the speed, and they attempted, unsuccessfully, to try and measure the UFO's altitude. Here's the deal with this though. The government did end up investigating, but the official explanation for these lights is the most cryptic message I've ever seen. It read, quote, I thought that the professor's lights might have been some kind of birds reflecting the light from mercury vapor streetlights, but I was wrong. They weren't birds. They weren't refracted light, but they weren't spaceships. The lights that the professor saw have been positively identified as a very commonplace and easily explainable natural phenomena. I can't divulge exactly the way the answer was found because it is an interesting story of how a scientist set up complete instrumentation to track down the lights. Telling the story would lead to his identity, and in exchange for his story, I promised the man complete anonymity. Despite people claiming that the mystery has been solved, by this explanation, people are left with a lot more questions than answers. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Shag Harbor incident. This UFO encounter is often referred to as Canada's Roswell, so I was shocked that I hadn't heard of it before. Basically, this incident took place on October 4th, 1967, when an unknown object crashed into the water near Shag Harbor, which is a tiny town in Nova Scotia. There were at least 11 people who witnessed this object as it crashed, and many people claimed to have heard a whistling sound followed by a loud bang when the crash took place. The witnesses that claimed to have seen the UFO were all doing a bunch of different things at the time. One couple was just sitting on their porch, but the 2 witnesses that really get me are a flight pilot and a ship captain. On Air Canada Flight 305, First Officer Robert Ralph pointed out to Captain Pierre Charbonneau that there was something strange at the left side of the aircraft. They reported an object tracking along on a parallel course a few miles away and described it as a brilliantly lit rectangular object with a string of smaller lights trailing the object. Shortly after they first noticed it, there was a large but silent explosion near the unknown object, and then 2 minutes later there was a second explosion, but this one faded to a blue cloud. As for the ship captain, Captain Leo Howard Mercy, he saw 4 blips on his Decca radar that were totally stationary. This led to him looking up to the sky, and that is when he saw 4 bright objects sitting in a rectangular formation about 28 kilometers from the vessel's window. He wasn't the only one who saw it on board. The entire crew of nearly 20 fishermen stood on deck and watched. A man named Laurie Wickens was another one of the witnesses, and he and some of his friends ended up calling the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, because they saw a huge object floating in the Atlantic Ocean about 1,000 feet off of the shore. This is all super weird, and not only the RCMP, but also the Royal Canadian Navy and the Royal Canadian Air Force became involved in investigation, but nothing was ever recovered or found. But it was also revealed that all commercial, private and military aircrafts along the eastern seaboard were accounted for. So what could have all these witnesses seen? Since they have never officially identified what it was in the official Government of Canada documents, it is listed as a UFO. And finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have the Westall incident. Taking it back to 1966, we have the largest mass UFO sighting in Australia that at the time was largely ignored. This incident took place when over 300 students and staff members of a school in Melbourne all witnessed multiple UFOs silently flying through the air before they landed in a nearby field. Well, there's been a ton of speculation about this incident in the many years it's been. One witness account stands out among the rest, and that is the account made by the science teacher from the school, Andrew Greenwood. He was alerted to the UFO event by a hysterical student, and when he went outside to see for himself, everything changed. Previously a skeptic of UFO stories, Andrew's mind was abruptly changed when he saw, as he described it, a round silver object about the size of a car with a metal rod sticking up in the air. He went on to explain that suddenly 5 planes came and surrounded the object, all while more people were gathering to watch. He called what happened next the most amazing flying he has ever seen, explaining that, quote, every time they got too close to the object it would slowly accelerate, then rapidly accelerate, and then move away from them and stop. Then they would take off after it again, and the same thing would happen. This went on for about 20 minutes before the mysterious object just vanished. As weird as this all was, what was almost weirder was what happened next. Firstly, the headmaster of the school is said to have tried to put a stop to anyone talking about the incident at all, threatening severe punishment to any student or staff who was caught speaking about it, and when the Royal Australian Air Force contacted him, he refused to talk to them at all about it. There have also been stories of witnesses getting visits from people warning them not to speak of the incident. Andrew explained, quote, when he asked the physical education teacher to describe what she had seen herself so that he could compare it with his own observation, she just wouldn't say anything. Another witness who did talk to Andrew and described what she had seen in great detail, just 30 minutes later refused to speak to him and wouldn't say a word. Was this because of the threats from the headmaster, or was something else going on here? This is definitely one strange UFO story that leaves behind a lot of questions.
I'm just gonna call this first sighting or series of sightings February 2023. February was quite a month for unidentified flying objects, and I wanted to start this list off with these sightings because of how recent they are. They may not be as definitive or weird as some of the other sightings on this list, but these were pretty high profile stories, and it's always far more interesting when the government is involved in these things. Just adds another layer of credibility to it. Not that the government doesn't lie or withhold information about things, I think we all know that that happens, but the fact that it's being reported on so heavily means it's pretty big news. So the story here is that several mysterious high altitude objects were shot down in February of 2023 over various airspaces. We had objects being spotted in Canada, United States, Latin America, China, Eastern Europe. It started when several unidentified objects were shot down over Alaska, the Yukon, and Lake Huron. The general of NORAD, Glenn D. Van Herk, made a statement saying the objects could be benign, but it wasn't 100% sure. When asked if they could be of alien origin, though, that's the question we're all digging to ask, he said he just wasn't ruling anything out. I'm just interested by this. It really seems like the government and military agencies are starting to become more open to the idea of extraterrestrial life, or maybe some of them already are fully aware of their presence. Either way though, it seems like it's being discussed more. It's not being written off as nonsense like it has been in the past. So just that aspect alone is interesting to me. Now, here's another interesting thing about these cases. There were recovery attempts made, to find these objects that had plummeted towards the Earth. Unfortunately, they all landed in areas that aren't all that accessible, so it made for a pretty difficult recovery process, and the missions were pretty soon abandoned. Now, that's what they say, but what if the government actually did recover something that they just aren't ready or even willing to show us? Could be the case. You never know. Next up, we have the Oumuamua Oumuamua. That's a hard word to say. I'm gonna try not to say it too many times on here. Old news with this one, right? It's that weird cylindrical object that was spotted flying through space. It's definitely been talked about plenty of times, including on this channel, I'm sure, but it's a recent article dated March 7th of this year that I'm referring to here. So, like I said before, I think when the government, military, or academics get involved with UFO type stories, it just makes it far more interesting to me. Not that I'd totally disregard some farmer in Ohio saying he was probed by a little gray, bug-eyed alien, but I don't know, people like attention sometimes. And a recent article written by Sean Kirkpatrick, head of the Pentagon's AARO, or All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, which specializes in unidentified flying objects, and a Harvard professor named Avi Loeb, they discussed the possibility that objects such as Oumuamua, spotted back in 2017, could be of alien origin. So pretty exciting. I mean, these are two learned, intelligent people writing an official document theorizing the possibility of alien life. I mean, that's just cool. The article does say, however, that the objects, like the Oumuamua, could be, quote, a parent craft that releases many small probes during its close passage to Earth. So probes observing Earth could be good or bad or neutral, depending on whether you're a glass half empty or half full type person. Now, they didn't just discuss that object, they were looking at a variety of unidentified objects or probes, and they wanted to speculate that these crafts could potentially power their batteries from starlight, and that maybe Earth's water could be fuel. It's pretty wild stuff, and yes, a lot of it is speculative, but the fact that a highly respected scientist that's spent 20 years studying physics is proposing these ideas, pretty fascinating. Something I also want to mention about people who are just very skeptical about aliens even showing any interest at all in Earth. You'll hear them say stuff like, well, extraterrestrial beings with all this advanced technology, they just wouldn't be interested in anything we're doing. It'd be like, God observing ants or something. And who's to say, first of all, that God doesn't like observing ants? And, even if that is the case, I mean, like, how can you really know that for sure? How on earth could we possibly know what beings from another planet are interested in? We don't know what kind of hobbies they have. It's also kind of counters their other argument, because it's like, yeah, spacefaring extraterrestrials would be leagues ahead of us in terms of intelligence, but I know what they're thinking. I know what they like. Just doesn't make any sense. The Texas Zoo creature. So we take a look at a lot of UFOs on this channel, so I thought I'd change it up a bit and take a look at a bizarre looking creature instead. This picture was taken just 1 year ago, back in May of 2022. It was taken by a security camera at a zoo in Amarillo, Texas at around 1:30 a.m. A bizarre figure was spotted on a security camera, and before you say it's just a lion on its hind legs, which would also be pretty freaky, mind you, this figure was outside of the zoo, so it's not one of the animals unless one of them escaped. Now, why am I putting this on an alien list? A lot of people think it looks like a werewolf or Sonic the Hedgehog or something, but I don't know. To me, it looks pretty alien. Look at the elongated back part of the head. It almost looks like a xenomorph from Alien or something. Plus, I find the presence of alien life to be far, far more likely than werewolves or other kinds of fantasy-based creatures like that. I mean, like, who knows, but there's a lot of unexplored space out there and a lot of explored space here on Earth. I think we'd have spotted a werewolf by now if they existed. There's also a big chance that this could just be a trick of the camera. Security footage can be kinda janky sometimes, or perhaps we have a zoo prankster on our hands, or maybe this is a super deformed person. If that's the case, I hope they're okay. Regardless though, this is an odd figure to see in the middle of the night outside of a Texas zoo. And trust me, I know my Texas zoos. The Wales UFO. I didn't know this, but it turns out there are a lot of UFO sightings in Wales. I don't know what aliens' fascination is with Wales, but reports date all the way back to the 1940s. Actually, all the way back to the 12th century, but I don't don't know if I give much credence to stuff dating back that far. Apparently religious pilgrims believed to have seen a fire-breathing dragon erupt from the sea and fly into the sky. Could have been a UFO and they just didn't know what to make of it and just called it a dragon, but anyway, way off topic. The UFO in question here was spotted back in September of 2016 by a police helicopter at around 9 p.m. It was only visible on the chopper's thermal camera and seemed to be moving at a speed of 106 miles per hour over the Bristol Channel. Full video of the footage was released by a former cop, Gary Hasseltine, who has been urging the UK government to come forward and reveal what they know about UFOs. What's also interesting about this one is that the object was moving against the wind, so it is or was being operated one way or another. It's not like it was some object caught up in a wind current or something. Police also stated years after the event that it could have possibly been a drone, but they were struggling to keep up with it, so it'd have to be a pretty fast one. There are drones that reach that 100-mile-per-hour speed, but they're pretty high-end. Your common drones clock in at around 45 to 70 miles per hour, so again, who knows, but it's possible. And coming in at our number 1 spot, we have aliens in Bolivia. I wanted to finish off with this one because we have reports of both your typical UFO sighting and reports of actual aliens being spotted here, so we're getting some real bang for your buck with this one. The story just happened back in March of this year, and it all started when residents of a small village in the La Paz area of Bolivia claimed to have spotted a mysterious green light in the sky. A bunch of people pulled out their phones and started filming. They were in absolute awe and said it looked to be some kind of alien spacecraft. Then 2 days later, little people were spotted running around the town at night. One villager named Rita Marquez reported to news outlets describing the creatures as little, almost like goblins, and is quoted saying they were miniature beings, like those little people who appear to children. And it felt like something creepy was happening, like they were welcoming their friends, you know? Now, I'm not sure exactly what she means by that, but it's definitely odd. This bizarre situation all culminated with several residents claiming to have found one of the small creatures curled up dead in a gutter one morning, the body of which soon vanished. So we clearly have a lot going on here. Weird lights in the sky, possibly even an aircraft spotted, little beings running around the streets at night, a dead one, unfortunately. It's all pretty weird, and sure, it's possible it's just a hoax or even maybe mass hysteria, but there's also a good chance that it isn't. I love stories like this where there are multiple witnesses. Again, it adds another layer of credibility to the whole thing because obviously it's a lot harder to organize a hoax and get multiple people involved. People talk, you know, they let secrets out. Another interesting thing about this one is that authorities did get involved and told the villagers to kind of stay hushed about the whole incident, so maybe they just thought everyone was nuts and didn't want to spread misinformation, but perhaps there is something going on here that they need to cover up for one reason or another. Either way though, something happened. Are they among us? We may soon find out.
Number 5, the Phoenix Lights. If you ask most people what the most famous UFO sighting in the world was, they might say the Roswell, New Mexico incident. It's definitely the most referenced in pop culture. There's a CW TV show about it that's had like 10 seasons. Roswell is almost synonymous with the concept of flying saucers. But the most documented UFO sighting occurred in 1997 in Phoenix, Arizona, when a series of bright lights in the sky were seen together by hundreds of people. Okay? This isn't just some passing dot, this was something hundreds of people corroborated on. Now, like any good UFO sighting, there's no real concrete answer as to what happened, and only speculation to go on. So let's run through the facts. It was on March 13, 1997. Hundreds of people around Phoenix described seeing these vivid bright lights, around 6 or 7 total. Now, reports claim that these mysterious lights were huge and big enough that they were blocking out your vision of the clouds, the stars, but they wouldn't produce any noise like a jet or a helicopter or anything. Big, blocky, silent. A few hours later on that same night, a second wave of sightings came over the city, describing a long trail of blinking objects that some said was a mile long and boomerang shaped. They were blinking in regular intervals, orange and blue lights. Air traffic controllers reported seeing these lights, but didn't detect any planes on the radar. And the air traffic controllers described this incident as inexplicable. But maybe the strangest part about all this, maybe just to me, is that the first person who called in the sighting was legendary 80s mullet owner and actor Kurt Russell, who who was flying into the city with his son. Snake Plissken asked what the strange lights hovering over the city was, leading to Kurt Russell calling it in. The only thing he got back from air traffic control was, "We don't show anything." Now officially the military would claim that this was a test for high intensity flares, but eyewitnesses weren't so convinced. The governor of Arizona at the time, who was a former Air Force officer, claimed that the aircrafts he saw that day didn't resemble anything he had ever seen in his life. So, what happened in Arizona that day? Was it a widespread enough hoax, government cover-up, or proof of life from beyond the stars? You tell me. And if you're looking for more UFO videos, you already know we have got that and then some. Click on through to the channel. We've literally got hundreds of UFO videos. You could be watching them for the rest of the evening. But if UFO stuff ain't your jam, we've got cryptids, conspiracies, true crime, fake crime, pretty much anything you could want. So hit subscribe, hit that little bell, and don't miss a single thing. But do it at the end of this video, would you kindly? We got way more UFO sightings coming up for you. Number 4, Japanese Flight 1268. Our next sighting comes to us out of Japan. Well, the skies of Japan. It's a video about flying objects after all. It was in November of 1986 when a pilot on a cargo flight thought that he made a close encounter of the third kind. When Captain Kenju Terauchi and a skeleton crew were flying a cargo delivery of some fancy bougie French wines into Japan, when Captain Terauchi claims he saw shining bright lights surrounding both wings of the plane. Now initially Terauchi said at the time he thought that this was just US flown fighter jets patrolling around the border of the Soviet Union, but when he got a decent look at the craft, he realized these weren't friends of Uncle Sam. He said, "2 spaceships stopped in front of our face, shooting off bright lights." He continued saying, "The inside of the cockpit shined brightly, and I felt warm in the face." These aircraft in particular were described as being cuboid, I guess they're Borg ships, with jet propulsion systems clustered around a dark center. At the same time that these unidentified objects were soaring by the plane, these objects seemed like they were jamming the plane's communications in some way, as Terauchi and the crew couldn't contact ground control at all during the sighting, as if there was some electromagnetic field. The rest of the crew, however, wasn't quite as convinced by this strange encounter, with the co-pilot and flight engineer believing that the objects they saw were not but strange lights, and agreed that they were definitely unexplained and they couldn't find a reasonable possibility for what they were, but that they didn't necessarily think they were flying saucers. A committee looking into the phenomena claims that it was just light refraction through ice crystals suspended in the clouds, but that doesn't quite explain how the cockpit got warm or anything like that, or where the communications were going. So what do you think? Aliens or ice crystals? Number 3, the Betty and Barney Hill incident. It's sad how many people see a UFO and no one else in the entire world will believe them. You know, not their friends, not their family. That's why this case is different. A young married couple claims that not only they saw a UFO together, but they were abducted together. That's one for the memory books. You know, they say the couple that probes together stays together. It's a fairly well documented case. It even served as the inspiration behind the alien abduction story in American Horror Story Asylum. And how about Evan Peters, huh? Love that guy. Anyway, the real story revolved around Barney and Betty Hill in 1961. The two of them were driving home through New Hampshire when they both saw a blinding bright light flying above them in the sky. Betty started to feel dizzy and the two of them soon found themselves asleep on the road. A moment passed and they found themselves parked in their driveway 2 full hours later, not remembering a second of what had happened. The couple claimed that they had traveled to a star system 39 light years away called Zeta Reticuli. The two had connections and were able to get in contact with Air Force officials to report their strange sighting, and would spend the next few years trying to explain their case to anyone who would listen in the desperate hopes of getting some help and some answers. Barney would meet with a psychiatrist regularly who he told that he kept having nightmares where he was being operated on by small gray-skinned, slanted-eyed creatures that would take samples of his skin, his fingernails, his flesh to do with he did not know. So the psychiatrist had him undergo hypnosis therapy, his wife as well, hoping perhaps that something repressed could be unearthed, and maybe they should have left it alone because what they found was terrifying. When going under hypnosis and waking back up, Betty was able to draw a scientifically accurate map of the star system from memory, creating a map that was nearly spot on to the real Zeta Reticuli. This incident inspired the Air Force to launch Project Blue Book to collect more stories of UFO abductions like this. Number 2, Kenneth Arnold. If you've ever wondered why flying saucers became the default term for UFOs as opposed to something like flying cigars or flying triangles, it has a very large part to do with this next story, which was one of the first big mainstream sightings of a UFO in 1947. Now interestingly, possibly coincidentally, possibly not, this incident occurred only a few weeks before the infamous Roswell, New Mexico incident. So UFO fever was just on the brain around 1947. This happened to Kenneth Arnold, a clean-cut all-American aviator. He was flying a small private plane over Washington around Mount Rainier on a scavenger hunt of sorts for the wreckage of a downed plane, which had a fairly significant reward offered by the Army for its salvage, which Kenneth was after, of course. While he was prospecting, Arnold claims to have seen nine blinding bright flashes of light, flying in a bizarre pattern like the tail of a kite. Described as saucers moving at an incredible speed, Arnold tried to do his level best to assess what these things were from the seat of his aircraft, working out how fast they were moving, taking his watch and clocking from when they reached the peak of the mountain. He worked out that they were going about 1,700 miles per hour, which is pretty darn fast considering in 1947 humans had just broken the sound barrier at 700 miles per hour, and that was an unbelievable leap in technology. Whatever it was Kenneth saw, it was something far more advanced than anything he'd ever seen on Earth. When he'd landed, he told the crew at the airport about everything that he'd seen, suggesting that he'd seen missiles or maybe some experimental new tech. For weeks after, Arnold would become a media darling, being interviewed by several reporters, all hoping to get the big scoop on this. Part of what made this such a defining UFO story for the American people was how earnest Arnold was about his story. He was an honest man who provided straightforward facts, experience with aviation, a mathematical and rational approach to all of this, and very little in the way of wild speculation. Which is a shame, because I love wild speculation. Let's do a little more wild speculating with our last point. Number 1, the Betty Cash incident. In December 29, 1980, Betty Cash would see something on the outskirts of Houston near Dayton that would change the course of her life forever. She was driving with her friend, Vicki Landrum, and Landrum's grandson. At around 9 p.m., the three of them noticed a blinding bright light in the sky. Landrum believed it to be the second coming of Jesus, whereas Betty Cash described it like this. We didn't know what it was, but we knew that it was something lighting up the sky. We all began to feel this heat, and all of a sudden Vicki screamed for me to stop. And when I stopped, she went forward, and her handprint was embedded into the dashboard of the car. And I thought, well, I've got to see what this is. So I got out, I walked towards the front of the car, and I stood there looking up to try and figure out what this object was, and then a diamond-shaped object appeared with flames shooting out. The heat was tremendous. When I reached for the door handle, it was so hot I couldn't even begin to open it. The only thing I was thinking while all this was happening was, are we going to make it out of this alive? Landrum stated that moments later, a large squadron of black helicopters took over the sky above the area. After the choppers cleared, Betty took the Landrums home and retired for the night. The next morning, Miss Cash said she was extremely sick, suffering from nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, weakness, an intense burning in her eyes. Now bizarrely, Landrum and her grandson all reported the same symptoms. These symptoms would worsen pretty seriously, with large blisters forming on the skin, and eventually Betty Cash had to be taken to a hospital where she was suffering from cancer symptoms, where she lost large patches of skin and clumps of hair. Now to date, there has never been a conclusive answer to what happened to Cash and Landrum. What caused the radiation sickness? Was it the military testing new technology? Was it a craft from another world?
In 5th place, we have the Roswell cover-up. Yes, I know I often reference Roswell when I talk about aliens and UFOs, but so much can be credited back to that historic summer. Retired NSA specialist William Sells of Noblesville, Indiana, claims that his uncle, Wayne Shell, had been a personal bodyguard to President Harry Truman back in 1947. The two men went to Roswell at the insistence of President of the United States Truman in July after sneaking out of the White House disguised as press. Wayne said they met Major Easley at the crash site. Major Easley promised the president that none of the bodies from the crash would remain. The Secret Service instituted Operation Doppelganger and provided Harry Truman's double to make sure the press was unaware of Harry's real location. At first, William didn't believe his uncle, exactly, how any rational person would react, until the family opened his military footlocker in his bedroom after his passing around 1969. Inside were letters from FDR and Truman, along with glossy photos of the Yalta Conference with Churchill, Stalin, and FDR. So, where did all the bodies go? That's what I would like to know. In fourth place, we have a gray alien abduction. Grant Rollins, a resident of suburban Maryland, describes himself as a fairly normal bachelor, living in peace until this all went down in December of 2017. He woke up at 1:30 a.m. to the sound of a break-in and went to the bedroom door to confront the intruder, but was suddenly rendered unconscious as he touched the doorknob. Okay, so someone brave. I would have been cowering under the blankets or like in my closet. He woke up naked and cold in a pill-shaped glass container. The lid was open, so he was able to stumble out onto the floor that was near the container. He described feeling sluggish and barely able to walk, but he thought he'd been kidnapped, so he was urgently trying to find an escape route. The room he was in was made of mostly concrete and plastic with fluorescent lights. He managed to limp into a hallway that was tunnel-shaped and followed a blue glow coming from down the hall. As he walked, he came out of the tunnel and entered a large cylindrical room lined with vehicles on hooks along the walls. They were human vehicles, mostly Japanese and German cars and motorcycles, but some vehicles were clearly from the American military. That's one way to store a collection. In the center of the room was what looked like a metal tree that was 6 stories tall with glowing blue leaves. As Grant stumbled closer, he realized this tree was a large metal cylinder and the leaves were capsules similar to the one he'd woken up in, except these still had people inside of them and were radiating a neon blue glow. As he paid more attention to higher up in this tree, Grant noticed some blue wires moving around in the dark area towards the ceiling. These clumps of wires suddenly floated down towards him and turned to reveal that they had faces in them, each with 2 large dark eyes and narrow slits for noses and mouth. He's compared them in appearance to the typical gray alien face from popular media, with 2 of the faces frowning and 1 smiling. There was an exchange of words and charades between himself and the smiling one for roughly 10 minutes, but he was so exhausted and they were so advanced that no important information was shared between them. Too bad. He passed out once again, waking up later face down in a puddle of his own drool on a glass floor. Gross. He was too tired to get up and was barely able to tilt his head up, just enough to take a look around. The room was apparently circular, about 150 square feet in size, and a bright, sterile white color. One of the tentacled creatures was in the room, but was busy facing away and operating a set of strange controls with no buttons or levers. Out of exhaustion, Grant's head fell back down, and through the glass floor saw that they had risen out of a deep black hole that was dug into a grassy field, where a rock-shaped lid closed around the hole to cover it. This is when he realized he was in a spacecraft, and had actually been in a silo of some sort that's here on Earth. Grant passed out for the last time, and was awoken by the sensation of being dropped onto his bed with a hard thud. He checked his phone for the time and saw that it was 6:30 in the morning. Later that day, he found an object that had been inserted and cauterized into his right leg, and experienced a run-in with some men in black suits within 4 days of the abduction. Grant claims that he never believed in abductions or UFOs or men in black, any of that. But now he doesn't have a choice in the matter and is annoyed that there's no official place to get legitimate information or help on the subject. I'm hoping that after talking about this, I don't see any men in black on my way home today. In third place, we have an Air Force landing cover-up. Quinn Nelson, who wants his location to stay private out of fear for his safety, knew a girl whose dad was stationed at an Air Force base in his state. At the time, there were 2 Air Force bases and 1 Marine Air Station in that state, so he feels comfortable making this story known. Quinn said he went to see the girl and stay with her family over a weekend, arriving on the Friday, just in time for family dinner. He and the girl decided to walk over to the base movie theater afterwards to enjoy some private time. And after the movie was done, they were walking back to the family's quarters in the company of many Air Force kids and families who also saw the movie. He said that as they were walking, Air Force Air Police personnel began driving down the base housing streets, ordering the theater goers to the nearest base housing residence. A siren or tone was wailing from somewhere, along with a code being repeated that Quinn refuses to name. The crowd didn't put up any kind of resistance and began moving when they were directed, as if this was a normal occurrence. Something Quinn observed as being weird to him, but hey, he wasn't going to be the only one to put up a fuss. When the group he was walking with arrived at a house, his girlfriend, without knocking, pushed the door open and they all walked in. Quinn said the members of the household were pulling the window drapes closed, sending out folding chairs, offering water, acting like this was a planned gathering instead of some random occurrence. Around an hour or so later, the air police again went up and down the streets, giving the all clear, and somewhere the same siren or tone was sounding. Later that night, his girlfriend's family told him that he must never tell anyone about what had happened on the base, saying that this is what happens when UFOs would land on base property or nearby, something that was apparently very common on Air Force bases. Anyone want to let me know in the comments section if that's true? Consider me intrigued. In second place, we have lizard beings from Colorado. Back Back in 1968, Hannah and her family were living in a small town around the west end of Montrose County called Irvine, Colorado. One early summer morning, she was awoken by the barking of the family dog named Tippy outside of her bedroom window, which was unusual for the pup, who usually only barked when someone or something was in a yard that they weren't supposed to be. Hannah remembers waking out of a deep sleep and hearing Tippy constantly barking and wondering why her older brother, who slept in the bunk above her, and her parents, who slept on the other side of the wall, weren't telling Tippy to quit it. Finally, Hannah was fed up and decided to turn over in bed and look out the window, and was met with a sight she didn't believe at first. There was a small circular ship with its landing gear down and hatch with stairs folded down to the ground. Next to the ship were green lizard-like beings with bright yellow eyes, webbed hands that resembled a bow and arrow, and some had tanks on their backs. They had thin bodies, were covered in scales, and had V-shaped toes. According to Hannah, the overall mood was that these beings were searching for something, but she had no idea as to what. Another alien exited the ship, but it was much larger in size than the others, and seemed to be the one giving out orders. This caused Tippy to begin barking aggressively once again, upsetting the aliens who began to approach the dog. Hannah instinctively jumped off her bed and rushed into her parents' room in an attempt to wake her mom, but struggled. Her mom slept as if she was completely out of it, and when she finally awoke, was incredibly sluggish in movement. Hannah explained what was going on outdoors and her concern for Tippy, but the mom was unable to see the creatures, wanting only to go back to sleep. Speaking from experience, my dad would have been the same way if I tried to wake him up. Trust me. Hannah's mom eventually told her to sleep away from the window, and before she fell back to sleep, she remembered seeing two of the lizard beings looking in her room through the window, and no longer hearing any noise from Tippy. When morning came, Hannah rushed outdoors in her PJs to check on the beloved pet, and Tippy was waiting around like nothing had happened. The occurrence was never discussed between Hannah and her mom again until shortly before her mom's passing in 2016, when she asked Hannah if she remembered seeing the lizard people and their ship back in the yard in Colorado. Creepy. In first place, we have the Voronezhsky abduction. I tried. I promise I tried. 34-year-old Vladimir and his 29-year-old wife Olga were at home with their 1.5-year-old son Arthur and their daughters Vanessa and Angelica. Olga had asked their daughters to run an errand, and while returning home, both girls saw an unusual object in the sky, so they rushed home and told their family that they had seen a flying star. Olga told them that it had most likely been a satellite or a plane, but the girls objected and explained that the object had been round, with strange white, yellow, and red flashing lights around its perimeter. Both girls then drew a picture of what they had seen, and despite the fact that they went to different rooms to sketch, both drawings were very similar. The girls then insisted that their parents go outside to look at the sky. Olga and Vladimir saw a distant hovering object in the sky that seemed to move and change shapes. Olga managed to take a photo of the object with her cell phone, but the photo only showed a yellow spot or elongated strip with a black background. The family went back inside, had supper, and went to bed. And while I would love to end this here, y'all know better about how this is about to go. Around 2 a.m., Vladimir suddenly awoke and saw that the whole room was lit by a whitish-violet light and tried to wake Olga, who refused to wake up, so he went back to sleep. And seeing as it was 2 in the morning, I would have done the same. The bright lights woke up their youngest daughter, Angelica, who ran to wake her mother. Olga then woke up, saw what the other two had seen, and woke Vladimir back up. He was amazed to see that the ceiling of the room had apparently disappeared or had become totally transparent. Right over them, instead of the ceiling, they could see the open sky and a huge disc-shaped craft hovering right above. Vladimir and Olga ran outside their home, still in their PJs, and could see a hovering disc-shaped UFO emitting the strong lights around 100 feet away. Olga began floating, zooming upwards in a spiral motion, and when Vladimir tried grabbing her legs, he discovered he couldn't control his body. Olga described feeling nauseous, unable to control her body as well. In a state of shock, the couple found themselves teleported inside a room with transparent walls and no furniture. Moments later, the duo witnessed 12 entities enter. The humanoids were short, around 4 feet tall. They had 3 fingers on each hand and large heads with smooth gray skin. Vladimir didn't notice any mouths, noses, or ears on them, but noticed their large, black, pupilless eyes. The entities had no visible legs and were moving around like caterpillars. They wore a completely sealed, tight-fitting coverall with masks and hoods that covered their bodies. Only one of the aliens was taller from the rest, easily over 6 feet tall, and stood behind the other small humanoids, with his face not being visible under his outfit. The short entities approached Olga first, placing her in a deep armchair that resembled a gynecologist's chair, prompting Vladimir, who was now unfrozen, to attempt to rush towards her when he ran into an invisible wall or force field. Two of the aliens approached him, and he asked what was going on, and they reassured him telepathically that you will soon be back home. Vladimir rightfully became angry and attempted to push the aliens away, but was thwarted by more entities grabbing him in an attempt to restrain him. The aliens asked him why he resisted, staring straight into his eyes each time they communicated telepathically, before inserting 4 metal rods into his chest area, paralyzing him completely. So from that moment on, he was unable to move and could only stand there helplessly and watch the aliens experiment on Olga. Somehow, they were able to cut into her stomach without her noticing or using any kind of known surgical instruments. She sensed the smell of her inner organs, feeling unpleasant but no pain, only tranquility and relaxation. Modern human medicine could apparently stand to learn a thing or two. The aliens seemed to be taking samples from her body and organs, and apparently were now using different instruments to study the organs inside her abdomen. Olga was only able to describe one that looked like a pair of pincers and had 3 clamps. After the strange procedures, the aliens closed and sewed up her stomach. Now, before the abduction, Olga had been bothered by stomach pains, and after the abduction, she never suffered from them ever again. The smaller humanoids respectfully called the taller humanoid by a word that Vladimir has loosely translated as the professor, who explained to Vladimir that their society was like a huge ant colony. After Vladimir was brought in front of the professor, he asked the entity why they had taken him and his wife, with the taller being answering that it had to be done. Both witnesses understood that having such feelings was the central interest of the aliens. The tall alien said, "We do not understand you. Why haven't you, intelligent animals, destroyed yourselves yet? How can you survive with your emotions?" He said that there was a space war going on at this time in the universe, and that the entity that you call God has implanted much information to Earth and into the waters of it. Those who are against God want that information destroyed. If the Earth is going to be destroyed, the Son of God would arrive to Earth again and will restore everything living in it. Through the transparent surface of the cabin, the duo could see planet Earth approaching and felt that their spacecraft was slowing down. The couple was then returned back to Earth the very same way they were abducted. First in the smaller module, and then this large disc-shaped craft, and then through the roof of their home inside a beam of light. At 11 a.m. the next morning, Vladimir and his wife Olga awoke, and a while passed before they talked about what had occurred. But after analyzing the mutual identical memories, they understood what had happened had not been a dream, but reality. The whole family underwent extensive medical tests to see if the aliens had left behind any implants to try to find some traces of surgery. By some mysterious manner, Vladimir lost his gray hairs, and his physical powers of endurance increased after the abduction. Olga was cured of her chronic colitis and gained the ability to make a drunken man sober by placing the palm of her head on a man's forehead for 2 to 3 minutes. In 5th place, we have Skinny Bob. Yes, I'm aware this is a controversial series of videos, but I truly believe that there's enough to believe to prove the validity of the clips. A very curious video showed up on YouTube in 2011, showing a collection of leaked videos that allegedly shows an alien being interrogated by some sort of government agency, possibly the KGB. If I go missing tomorrow, y'all know why now. An alien that looks like a typical gray-type entity is shown being interviewed and examined, supposedly as part of some sort of diplomatic exchange. The creature is described as being from the Zeta Reticuli, star system, sent as part of an envoy to discuss matters of mutual concern. According to the videos, the aliens would be escorted by special officers and only meet with high-ranking officials. Pretty formal. Although several aliens are claimed to have been present, the one most prominently featured has been given the nickname Skinny Bob. The alien appears as a very thin, slouched over figure with an oversized bald head, slit-like mouth, large eyes that seem expressive and blank, and claw-like hands. There was apparently a whole series of interviews conducted with the creature between 1942 and 1969, although only a few clips have managed to get leaked out. The most well-known clip simply shows Skinny Bob sitting at a table, apparently in a telepathic interview, after which we see footage of the alien from head to toe, showing its disproportionately long arms and overall build. After that, there's a shot of it within a pool of some sort of liquid where it would supposedly sleep. I guess that's where we got the idea for a waterbed. According to the videos, the aliens were often filmed without their knowledge or agreement, with document 072/E supposedly describing an incident in 1961 where 3 of the beings realized they were being secretly filmed by a hidden device, which was considered a violation of their agreement. Now, I don't know about you, but I wouldn't want to cross an alien. There was a treaty that stipulated that photographs and filming of the entities would not be allowed unless specific permission was given. While these two clips are the most well-known and widely available, there were allegedly other clips that have since been taken down, such as that of the alien spacecraft and another of an autopsy being performed on a dead specimen at the base. Look, I will admit there have been many assumptions that this footage was faked, but let's review the evidence here. The budget to pull off this sort of high-quality costuming and filming would have been over like $250,000 alone, and no one's claimed responsibility or tried to monetize the footage in any way. Now this was in 2011 and now it's 2023. It's been a minute. If this was like a tie into a horror movie, somebody would have claimed it by now. Many CGI experts and those in the movie industry have studied the footage and most agree that if it is a fake, it is the work of a studio with a big budget. And as somebody who has worked on big budget movies, no studio is wasting that kind of cash for a hoax. In fourth place, we have a glimmery alien from Florida. Oh, before I forget, from this point on, all stories are from the mouths of former astronauts, who happen to be some of the most credible witnesses of UFOs and alien life out there. They're literally trained in spacecraft identification and screened for mental stability and vision perfection. Take that, skeptics. In October of 2014, former space traveler Adam Maloney was walking his dog in the Pembroke Pines, Florida neighborhood, and came around a curve in the sidewalk and, street. He noticed something unusual and stopped walking, staring at it, trying to figure out exactly what he was seeing. Now, his dog seemed more annoyed that Adam had just stopped. The dog refused to move or bark. I get it. Adam described seeing a figure around 30 feet from his spot in the area between the sidewalk and street. Not facing him, though. It was like skeletal thin, bony, around 6 feet tall with white or light grayish skin, no hair, and something bluish near the ear. He knew immediately it wasn't human when the creature sensed Adam staring, looked over its right shoulder, directly at him, and then looked down at the puppy. Then it suddenly started to run into the middle of the street and then down the next street into the next block. Its knees were apparently backwards, which I'm trying to picture right now, and that is so weird. As it ran, it began to gradually fade, like the edges were only part of what Adam could see. It was glimmering and fading until he just couldn't see it anymore. He never saw it again, but I wonder. In third place, we have the tales of Edgar Mitchell. Edgar was an Apollo astronaut who passed away in 2018 at the age of 85, and he had many theories about aliens that he often shared with the public. He believed aliens are real and UFOs from extraterrestrials have visited us before, publicly stating that he thought there was a cover-up involving aliens and their visits to Earth. As the sixth man to walk on the moon and a NASA astronaut, his theories and beliefs were among the most credible of UFO believers. Not only was Edgar an astronaut, but he was also a test pilot for the Navy, had an MS in aeronautical engineering, and was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1970. Take that for credibility. Part of his belief in alien life stemmed from experience he had returning to Earth from the moon, where he felt more connected with the universe than he had ever been before. Edgar has said publicly that he's 90% sure that many of the unidentified flying objects recorded since the 1940s belong to aliens from other planets. When he started speaking out in the 1990s, he said he was only then coming out with his knowledge because he didn't want to be labeled a UFO crank, and stood by his beliefs no matter how much he was criticized. And honestly, that's pretty credible, seeing as anyone who spoke before that, especially to do with Roswell, not a good reputation. In an interview in 1996, Edgar said that there were alien bodies at Roswell, but the government covered it up. In 1998, he called on Washington, D.C. to acknowledge publicly what it knew about alien life. He said he had witnesses he knew personally from intelligence agencies and the military who convinced him that the US government had been covering up UFOs for 50 years, including evidence from Roswell. In 2008, he was interviewed and spoke about how the Roswell crash was real and aliens had contacted humans multiple times. Interestingly enough, Edgar's beliefs were in line with those of Philip James Corso, who was chief of U.S. counterintelligence corporations in Rome in the 1940s and chief of the Pentagon's Foreign Technology Desk in the 1960s. He even wrote a book, The Day After Roswell, where he said that he moved alien artifacts from the Roswell crash, which were later reverse engineered to develop some of our more advanced technology. In an interview in 1996, Edgar said he had met with officials from 3 other countries who had personal encounters with aliens from other planets, not just secondhand information. The evidence of alien contact was strong and classified, including that extraterrestrials were giving technology to the US government. Hi, Canadian here. Can we get some of that too? In 2004, Edgar said that the government was studying alien bodies, but stopped sharing that information with presidents after John F. Kennedy. During a radio interview, he said that aliens were far more advanced than us, and we would have been gone a long time ago if they were hostile. Well, A witness doesn't really get much more credible than Edgar. In second place, we have a Canadian sighting. A former astronaut who would like to remain anonymous was glancing outdoors one day at the unfinished sunroom attached to his bedroom, which he described as having windows that were about 3 to 4 feet off the ground, wrapped around the room, providing a good view of the backyard of the home. Exactly what you want in a sunroom, honestly. He saw the bust of what people described as a mantid, describing it as a confusing sight similar to an action figure. This being had a large muscular body with a head that was insect-like, with eyes that wrapped around its head, and its face ended in a point similar to that of a beak. The view he had was of its head slightly turned with the body facing him. The eyes were rounded near the front of the face and wrapped to the back and ended in a sharp point, protruding slightly, but not like a mantis, and were very black, similar to Vanta black. The alien was around 5 feet in height, so not, super tall, so shorter than me. The suit he was wearing was black and shiny, with an indented texture, almost plastic looking, with a large round collar. The body looked approximately human, but the musculature was more rounded and not as defined, making it look more exaggerated and like a toy or a muscle suit. The head was dark with some orange tint on it near the back and a greenish tint near the beak. After a few seconds of eye contact, the window burst outwards and our narrator looked away for a split second, during which the entity disappeared. That same summer, most of those windows in that sunroom slowly burst, which is also really weird. As time went on, he became obsessed and terrified of gray alien, describing symptoms of extreme pareidolia, seeing big black eyes in almost everything and feeling terrified. In first place, we have a communion alien. Former space traveler Kevin Daniels grew up by the woods and at the age of around 6 years old had a terrifying experience. One afternoon, while playing in his backyard with his brother, he began hearing a very hard knocking sound coming from the side of the house. He looked at the house and saw nothing, and his brother continued playing. The sound hit the house again, and once again he looked and saw nothing. This horrendous sound hit the house for a third time, but this time Kevin felt the instinct to turn his head to the left, facing the garage by the woods. This is when he spotted a gray creature standing partly behind a tree right in front of the garage. He's described it as having an upside down onion head with large slanted eyes, a small mouth, and nose. It then telepathically communicated directly into Kevin's head, but in a demonic sounding voice. His brother noticed something was wrong with him and asked Kevin, what was wrong, but Kevin couldn't speak. He couldn't even get his legs to move, describing the fear like nothing he had ever experienced in his life. The alien began laughing demonically in his head, and he described it as deafening. When Kevin was finally able to scream and partially run, almost falling, he ran for the front door of the house, encountering his mother, who came running, obviously concerned, asking what was wrong. Kevin was crying hysterically and screaming, realizing that whatever this thing was, it was pure evil. His parents tried asking his brother what had happened, but the brother had no idea. Kevin described to his parents what he had seen and what had happened and begged them not to look, but the parents decided to, rightfully go out and investigate the tree in the garage area, finding nothing. Many years later, Kevin came across a book that had the exact picture of the gray alien on it, called Communion. After looking through the contents of the book, he knew then that others had seen the same creature he had, and that it was real and not just a figment of his imagination or heat stroke or anything like that.
Coming up first on this list of alien abductions today is going to be Antonio Villas-Boas. I probably pronouncing that wrong, I'm gonna be honest, should have looked it up before. A Brazilian man who became infamous in 1957 when his alleged story of an alien encounter rocked our understanding of this world. According to his account, he was working on his family's farm near São Francisco de Sales when he observed a bright red object in the night sky. As this object approached, Boas claimed it changed color to orange and then landed on the ground. He described it as looking like a metallic egg-shaped craft with rotating lights on top. Reportedly, 4 small beings emerged from the craft. Humanoid, grayish blue skin, the classic little gray alien that you always see. These beings took him aboard their craft, they took samples of his DNA, and also, if you believe what he said, they said that they had a mate with one of their more attractive female humanoid aliens. After a beautiful night, Boas claimed that he was released and watched as the craft took off and disappeared into the night sky. He reported experiencing physical symptoms afterwards, including nausea and weakness. Now, initially, Boas would keep this to himself. It's embarrassing to tell your friends you kissed an alien, I guess. Eventually, though, he would share his story in 1958, contacting a journalist and gaining widespread attention from media all over, all the way up to top 5 scary YouTube videos. And if you're looking for way more stories about alien abduction, like I just said, Top 5 Scary is kind of the name in that. Click on through, we have got videos on every subject you could possibly think up that's creepy and crawly. So hit subscribe, make sure to hit that bell as well so you don't miss a single scream, but if you would be so kind, do that at the end of this video because I got 4 more stories of alien abductions coming up for you right now. Number 4. Yaphet Kotto. Yaphet Kotto is an American actor. He's most known for Live and Let Die, but he is far more famously known as Parker in Ridley Scott's 1978 masterpiece Alien. Perhaps then that it's a bit ironic, or it's perfectly fitting, that he has been encountering aliens since he was young. Kotto believes in aliens, alongside seeing aliens, and has even claimed to have made direct physical contact and held an alien. Speaking out for the first time ever about this in 2017, Kotto told Vice News about his experiences. He said it began in his youth when he was staying home one day looking out at the streets of the Bronx, New York, watching people play stickball. He turned around and there was a humanoid figure that stood 5 or 6 feet tall with an elongated head which disappeared. Pretty sad, because Kotto would spend a lot of his life pursued by aliens with elongated heads on board the USS Nostromo. He claimed that over the next 50 years he was continuously monitored. He described one scenario where coming home and then going into his garage to meditate, he saw something shining ethereally bright. He says that there were things flying over his house, wouldn't call them aircrafts but entities. He said that every time he would move to a new house, there would be a ring of smoke that would be present when he moved in. Now, the most outlandish claim was that while visiting the Philippines, Kotto claims he saw a UFO the size of Yankee Stadium flying over an office he was staying at following that same circle of smoke. Now, there's not really any recordings or sightings of a gigantic UFO in the Philippines around this time, so kinda have to wonder. Now, Kotto claims to have an IQ of 196 and describes himself as being mentally stable. Who isn't? And was wary to talk about any of his paranormal experiences for fear that people would dismiss him for his connection to the Alien movies. So what do you think, my fair viewers? Is it too much of a cosmic coincidence? Or was it perhaps destiny that an actor famous for being tangled with aliens was pursued by them in real life? Maybe he was just getting really into the role, doing that like Jared Leto method acting research, and thought that to play a guy hunted by aliens, he should be hunted by aliens in real life. Number 3. Linda Napolitano. Linda Napolitano, also known as Linda Quartile, is a woman who claims that she was abducted by aliens in New York City in 1989. Even aliens can't resist the allure of the Big Apple. Gotta come check out Lady Liberty. Her story has become one of the most famous, but also controversial alleged alien abduction stories. Now, according to how Miss Napolitano tells it, she was asleep in her 12th floor apartment in Manhattan when she was suddenly awoken by a very blinding bright light. She claimed then that she saw 3 small beings with big pale gray skin and large black eyes that levitated her out of her bedroom window and into a waiting nearby UFO up above. She described these beings as very humanoid and looking about 4 feet tall, another example of those classic little gray aliens like we mentioned in the first point. Napolitano reported that she was taken to a room on the craft where she was examined by these beings. She said that she was taken to a council room where she saw several humanoid-esque beings who were running the thing, sort of administrative, seemed like a captain or commander type. Napolitano claimed that these beings communicated with her telepathically, and they told her that they were from a far off planet called Serpo, and were conducting experiments on humans to understand our physiology as we were a bit new to them. Okay then, it's completely reasonable, no cause for any alarm. Take a couple fingernails, take some spit, take some hair, take whatever you need. Now, Napolitano's alleged abduction got her quite a lot of attention because it's a fantastical story and a wild depiction of an abduction, and her story was featured in major news outlets and even a book detailing what happened. Now, obviously there is some skepticism if Napolitano is just telling a tall story to get a little attention, but over the years she has maintained that what happened to her was the good and honest truth, and has since become a fairly notable figure in the UFO communities sharing her story. Number 2. Boriska Kiprianovich. Boriska Kiprianovich is a Russian man who gained attention due to his claimed extraordinary abilities and also his alleged memories of his past life on Mars when he was a Martian. Born on January 11th, 1996 in Volsky, Russia, Boriska started attracting media attention from a fairly early age. According to Boriska, he began speaking very shortly after his birth. Babies don't usually do that. He displayed exceptional intelligence and knowledge beyond his years, claiming that they stemmed from his previous life when he lived on Mars. And he shared details about his Martian life, its civilization, and its advanced technology. According to Boriska, if you were expecting the Martians, you're out of luck because because they've already come and gone, claiming that the Martians were a highly advanced society that was devastated by a cataclysmic event thousands of years ago and have since been wiped out. He claimed that Martians possessed a deep understanding of spiritual concepts, had far longer lifespans than humans, and had technology infinitely more advanced than ours. They probably also have some pretty cool movies. It makes sense then that Elon Musk wants us to get back out there so bad. Come check out some of the wreckage of their cool society. While some people found Boriska's story intriguing and considered it evidence of reincarnation or extraterrestrial contact, others remain, I think, a little healthily skeptical. For one thing, I didn't know you could reincarnate from like a different planet. I thought you had to reincarnate on the same planet, but I guess not. It's definitely fantastical, and until we can actually get up to the surface of Mars, it's going to be pretty difficult to confirm or deny if there really was a society that existed there previously. Now, it should also be noted that as the years have gone on, Boriska has spoken out less and less about his past life as a Martian prince, and there have been a lot fewer updates on him overall, which definitely lends a teeny tiny bit of skepticism. It does make you wonder if maybe the whole story was just a young person making something up, which I've never heard of something like that happening, so I don't know. Number 1, David Huggins. Oh, David. We've talked about Mr. Huggins before on the channel, and I'm talking about Mr. Huggins again because he's one of my favorite abduction stories. I saved the best for last. David Huggins is a painter who claims that he has been abducted by aliens multiple times throughout his life. They just could not get enough lovin' of Huggins. His first account happened when he was young, and he reported that he saw a UFO hovering over a nearby field, and a humanoid figure appeared down from the craft, blessing Huggins by telling him telepathically that he would have a special mission to fulfill in life. Of course, he had no idea what the special mission was at the time, and if he did, maybe he would not have been as excited. Over the years, Huggins claims that he had several encounters with these alien humanoids who had blessed him. He describes them as being tall and thin, and with large heads and large eyes. Now, he says these beings have taken him aboard their craft and shown him a number of things, including the creation of the universe, the future of the human race, how they get caramel inside chocolate bars without there being a hole, all sorts of wondrous things. Now, here's where things get interesting and a bit difficult to talk about with content guidelines, because Huggins claims that as a part of fulfilling this galactic destiny that he's gone for a few rolls in the hay with aliens, and that he's fathered several alien human hybrids with the extraterrestrials, and my mom watches these videos, so I'm sorry if I'm struggling. Inspired by these momentous events, Huggins painted his truth, rather directly influencing his artistic career, with most of his paintings depicting humanoid beings and UFOs hanging out. His paintings are actually visible in the Visionary Art Museum in Baltimore if you're up near there and want to check them out sometime. They're really cool. They are definitely not safe for work unless your work is my work, at which case looking at pictures of aliens kissing is my work and my passion. Do what you love, and you never work a day in your life, and I have never worked a day in my life.
In 5th place, we have an alien body. Yep, kicking today off with a corpse. Go figure. Did y'all expect anything less? This tale takes place in Russia, and while I don't exactly recommend physically trying to travel there right now for, reasons, we shall take this trip virtually. Eugenia Popova, a Petrovdastuk, I tried. City, first reported in 2011 that she had been keeping a frozen alien body in a refrigerator for a couple of years. You know, casually. I have so many questions. Like, did she keep it next to her food? Was it kept in a spare fridge? Did it smell, and what did it smell of? Allegedly, she found it next to her summer house, so I guess we can assume it was a fridge that wasn't used as much? On the original day that she discovered the body, Eugenia claimed that she was disturbed by a terrible noise that shook her from her sleep, describing it as deafening, screeching, and overpowering. She rushed outdoors and came across the boiling hot alien remains lying next to metal fragments. The creature was between 40 to 50 centimeters long, had a big head, mouth, and orbits, and was wearing a one-piece garment of some sort. Now, 2 days after going public with her story, Eugenia was visited by some people who confiscated the body for the purpose of investigation, and according to their words, took it to the Karelian Research Center of the Russian Academy of Sciences. However, employees of the research center who were interviewed later said they had never heard of this discovery. I'm sensing an all too familiar government cover-up here. How about you folks at home? Honestly, if the photos weren't as convincing as they are, I probably wouldn't have included it in today's list, but I just couldn't tear my eyes away from how strange it looks. Like, what do you think it looks like? Let me know in the comments. In fourth place, we have a tale from Wendy's. Now, while I'm not accusing the creators of the Frosty of having alien knowledge, one of their Colorado locations happens to be the setting for our next encounter. Back in 1987, 16-year-old Jake Wells and his family were on a family trip to Texas from Washington and decided to stop at this fateful Wendy's for lunch, where Jake and his sister quickly grabbed a table for themselves to, escape the adults in the car and opted to people watch while they waited for their mom to grab food. Yeah, my brother and I probably would have done the same thing. Their table was approximately 3 feet away from two adults that appeared to be in their 40s or 50s. Jake and his sister Marissa immediately noticed weird vibes from this group, so they focused their observations on this family unit. The woman had long brown hair, was wearing a knee-length light tan trench coat, even though it was around 85 degrees out and in August. For those of us like myself who prefer their temperature in Celsius, that's around 29 degrees. Way too sticky icky for my liking, even if I was wearing like a sundress, never mind a full leather coat. The man of the unit looked kind of plain, with short brown hair, no facial hair, and had on glasses that were way too big for his face. The kid was weirdly dressed in clothes that were not typical for the 80s, and had short, light brown hair. All three of them looked like they had never seen sunlight, being extremely pale with pale lips. Okay, I'm pale, I'm not an alien. Also, the trio had large, mesmerizing brown eyes. Even though our narrator admits to really staring, the group never looked at him or his sister directly. In the middle of the family's table sat 7 or 8 hamburgers, untouched, in their wrappers, along with 5 large fries and no drinks. The family was simply sitting there, staring at the food as if it made 0 sense to them. Jake's mom eventually dropped off food for Jake and his sister, which they rapidly dug into, and after 10 minutes had passed and the family still hadn't touched their pile. Eventually, the mom of the group said, "Do as they do. Unwrap the items and put it in your mouth. Blend in." At this point, Jake assumed they were possibly from another country, but the woman spoke perfect English without any sort of accent. Immediately after the command, all 3 members of the unit, at the exact same time, with precise matching mannerisms, began to unwrap a corner of a hamburger, but suddenly stopped mid-unwrap and acted like they were hearing something that Jake and his sister did not hear. Heads tilted, in unison, and paused for a few seconds. The woman said, clear as day, "We must go. The mothership is here. We must go now. We cannot miss it." Jake frantically looked around to see if anyone else was witnessing these events, with no success. Only him and his sister. He frantically signaled to his mom for help and rushed outside, dragging her by the arm as he explained his observations. They spotted the trio going around the back of the building and followed them, only to have them disappear completely once Jake and his mom rounded the corner. They searched everywhere, but to no avail. This event has bothered Jake in the back of his mind ever since, which is pretty fair. That's a lot of food and money to waste. And while I know a lot of magicians, that kind of disappearing act is genuinely impossible by human standards. In the middle of the pack, we have the original Roswell evidence. Yes, I know, I reference it all the time, but it's truly one of the best examples of alien proof that cannot be debunked as easily as some of the other older claims or more modern claims that have already been debunked. Rancher W.W. Mac Brazel had found wreckage on his property in Lincoln County, New Mexico, so a little bit north of Roswell, sometime between the middle of June and early July, describing it as rubber strips, tinfoil, and thick paper. Now, this ranch had no phone, no radio, so Mac was completely unaware of the ongoing flying saucer craze, so he just gathered the debris and, pushed it under some brush, just wanted to kind of forget about it and goodbye. This wasn't the first instance of the flying disc spotting in the region, with several stories already being reported to the press that year. On July 5th, Mac drove into the nearby town of Corona, where he heard stories of silvery flying discs, and 2 days later, on July 7th, made the decision to unearth the wreckage and bring it to the sheriff's office in Roswell. The sheriff called in the Roswell Army Airfield, which assigned the matter to Major Jesse Marcel. Mac brought Major Marcel back to the debris site, and the two gathered up more pieces of rubber and tinfoil, with the Major taking the materials home. On July 8th, Public Information Officer for the Roswell Army, Walter Hott, issued a press release stating that personnel from the field's 509th Operations Group had recovered a flying disc near Roswell. On that same day, Major Marcel took the material to his base commander, Colonel William Blanchard, who reported the findings to General Roger Ramey at Fort Worth Army Airfield, WAF for short. General Ramey ordered the material be flown to Fort Worth immediately, leaving Marcel to board a crazy flight. As soon as Marcel brought the material to General Ramey's office, both Ramey and his chief of staff, Colonel Thomas Dubose, identified the material as pieces of a weather balloon kite. The weather officer on duty explained to reporters that ray wind devices were used at about 80 weather stations across the country. The balloons were attached to a 6-pointed reflective device that looked like a silver star. After launch, the balloon would expand with increasing altitude before bursting at around 60,000 feet, with pieces dispersing in their fall to the ground. After the initial newspaper reports of 1947, the Roswell incident faded from public attention for more than 30 years until the late 1970s, which brings us to February of 1978, when UFO researcher Stanton Friedman interviewed Major Marcel, whose statements contradicted those that he made to the press in 1947, saying that, they wanted some comments from him, but he wasn't at liberty to do that, so he could just keep his mouth shut. And General Ramey is the one who discussed, everything to the newspapers, the newsman, what it was, and to just forget about it. It's nothing more than a weather observation balloon. Of course, they both knew differently. While he didn't elaborate on that statement, he did deny the popular theories at the time of any bodies being found near the debris. Dang. After United States congressional inquiries, the General Accounting Office launched an inquiry and directed the Office of the United States Secretary of the Air Force to conduct an internal investigation. A report released in 1994 concluded that the material recovered in 1947 was likely, keyword here, debris from Project Mogul, a military surveillance program employing high-altitude balloons and classified portions of an unclassified New York University project by atmospheric researchers. A scholarly consensus emerged concluding that the military had decided to conceal the true purpose of the crash device, allegedly nuclear test monitoring, and instead inform the public that the crash was of a weather balloon. The balloon had allegedly been launched from the Alamogordo Army Airfield a month earlier, carrying a radar reflector and classified Project Mogul sensors for experimental monitoring of Soviet nuclear testing. The Air Force reports were dismissed by UFO experts as being either disinformation or simply implausible, and I'm tempted to agree with them. What was going on? I'm pretty sure this was real. In second place, we have a car and UFO crash from Minnesota. While on patrol outside the small community of Stephen, Minnesota, at around 2 a.m. on August 27th of 1979, Officer Val Johnson noticed a bright object hovering above the road and decided to investigate a little closer. My common sense would usually tell me that that means time for bed, but you do you, pal. The UFO suddenly rocketed straight at his patrol car, killing the engine. The last thing Val remembered was light all around him and the sound of glass shattering. When he woke up, the strange object was gone, and he was blind and bruised, but able to radio for help. Fellow policemen soon arrived and found Johnson's 1977 Ford in a heck of a state. The windshield was splintered and smashed, there were dents in the hood, and both a headlight and the roof beacon were wrecked. The car's 2 radio antennae were bent, respectively at 45 and 90-degree angles. Val also stated that the car's clock and his wristwatch both stopped for 14 minutes and that he had been blacked out for 39 minutes. The doctor who attended to him described his sight injury as similar to welder burns, caused by extreme exposure to UV light. Thankfully, he eventually recovered his vision, and the patrol car, with the original damage intact, now stands in a museum in the Minnesota town of Warren. In first place, we have a videotape from Puerto Rico. We're traveling a little more forward in time from the last 2 tales, up to the year 1997, which happens to be the year I was born. Many visitors to the El Yunque rainforest, located in the eastern region of the island, have experienced encounters with UFOs and apparent alien creatures at the site. An interesting fact pertaining to the encounters is the fact that music, especially flute music, seems to attract the mysterious creatures in the forest. And that flute music seems to have been what caused the encounter of a very strange-looking creature with several young men in the area known as La Coca Waterfall in December of 1997. The group of guys included Benjamin Loreno, Danny Quinones, and 2 other buddies who had gone up to the sector where the La Coca Waterfall is located on Highway 191. They parked their car on the side of the road, and Benjamin took out a portable camcorder he had brought with him from the car. Their intention was to experience a UFO sighting and capture video evidence, as they were interested in the UFO matter, and the forest was a place where many UFO-related events had occurred. Late at night, they decided to meditate, and Danny began to play a flute, casually. Sounds like a lot of my musical theater friends. Moments later, all of them heard something heavy fall to the ground from the high branches of a tree behind them. Looking at the group of trees from where the sound came from, they all saw a strange-looking creature that was trying to hide itself behind a tree and the undergrowth on the spot. On instinct, they all immediately ran to where the creature was, and Benjamin turned the camcorder on and began to film what was happening, helped by the light from the camera's lamp. He pointed the camera to where the creature was, and took video for several seconds, after which the creature ran away and was lost in the brush in the dark of the night. Excited, they examined the recording, and sure enough, the image of the mysterious figure appeared in the video. Depicted in it was an extremely thin, weird creature around 4 feet tall, with a gray-green hued skin that looked oily, humid, sort of shiny looking. And then even though everything happened really quickly, it could be seen that the creature had long, thin arms and that it walked on 2 legs. Quickly, it jumped from behind the undergrowth to the left side of the image on the camera, where it hid behind the trunk of a tree, but at the same time it looked out from behind said tree to observe the humans. One could see that the head of the creature was semi-triangular in shape, wide above and thin below, and that it had two very large dark eyes that were slanted and elongated upwards. At one point, perhaps due to the dim light from the camera's lamp disturbing its vision, the creature opened and closed its eyes, and that's when one could see that it seemed to have two different sets of membrane-looking eyelids, one that opened and closed sideways, and another that opened and closed up and down. Moments later, the creature disappeared quickly, running through the dense vegetation at the site. The video has since been shown to several veterinarians and biologists in Puerto Rico, and none of them could identify what type of animal species the creature in the image could belong to. In fifth place, we have a mysterious radio signal. So in February of 2003, astronomers with the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence Project, SETI for short, used a massive telescope in Puerto Rico to re-examine the 200 sections of the sky which had all previously yielded unexplained radio signals. So these signals had all disappeared, except for one which had become stronger. The signal, widely thought to be the best candidate yet for an alien contact, comes from a spot between the constellations of Pisces and Aries, where there are no obvious stars or planets, named SHGB02+14A. The signal has a frequency of about 1,420 megahertz. So this happens to be one of the main frequencies at which hydrogen, the most common element in the universe, readily absorbs and emits energy. Some astronomers have argued that extraterrestrials trying to advertise their presence would be likely to transmit at this frequency, and SETI researchers conventionally scan this part of the radio spectrum. So the telescope has only observed the signal for about a minute in total, which is not long enough for astronomers to analyze it thoroughly. I can already hear y'all now in the comments, but Alexa, how was this scary? So this contributes to the theory that I very much support, that aliens are kind of treating us like animals in a zoo, constantly monitoring and interfering only when need be. Personally, I know I already feel like I'm under a magnifying glass on a regular basis. I don't need sky aliens watching me. Thanks! In fourth place, we have the Viking Mars lander. So taking it all the way back to 1976, when tests performed on Martian soil samples by NASA's Viking landers hinted at chemical evidence of life. Two Viking landers became the first US spacecrafts from Earth to touch down on Mars. They took the first high-resolution images of the planet, surveyed the planet's geographical features, and analyzed the geological composition of the atmosphere and surface. Perhaps most interestingly, they also performed experiments that searched for signs of microbial life in Martian soil. Overall, these life detection experiments produced surprising and contradictory results. So one experiment, the labeled release or LR experiment, showed that the Martian soil tested positive for metabolism, which is a sign that on Earth would almost certainly suggest the presence of life. However, a related experiment found no trace of organic material, suggesting the absence of life. The LR experiment that reported the positive result mixed soil with radioactive carbon-labeled nutrients and then tested for the production of radioactive methane gas. The production of radioactive methane suggested that something in the soil was metabolizing the nutrients and producing radioactive gas. But since other experiments on board failed to find any evidence of life, NASA declared the result a false positive. So at this point, I would hope that anyone watching this knows that that negative statement, in a sense, only strengthens our arguments. In the 40 years since these experiments, scientists have been able to reconcile the conflicting results, and a small minority of scientists argue that the Viking results were positive for life on Mars. One prominent proponent of this view is Gilbert Levin, experimenter of the Viking LR experiment. At first, Gilbert thought that the LR results were unclear, and stated merely that the results were consistent with biology. However, in 1997, after many years of further experiments on Earth, along with new discoveries on Mars, which NASA has now declared habitable by the way, and the discovery of microorganisms living under conditions on Earth as severe as those on Mars, he and his Viking co-experimenter, Dr. Patricia A. Stratt, have argued that the Mars results are best explained by living organisms. Sadly, all future experiments will have an unavoidable drawback: the potential for contamination by previous landers. In this regard, the Viking landers were unique in that they were the only pristine Martian life detection experiment that we will ever have. In third place, we have Roswell. Look, whether you like it or not, Roswell is easily the most popular and controversial alien and UFO spotting to this day, and there is so much lore around it to not mention it constantly. Former CIA agent Oscar Wayne Wolf claims he saw both living aliens, retrieved parts, and remains of alien ships throughout his career. The agent made these shocking claims about the infamous Area 51, claiming he caught a glimpse of an extraterrestrial spacecraft and a living alien. The 77-year-old man was speaking to UFO researcher Richard Dolan, but concerned about giving up his true identity at the time, went by the anonymous. So after the agent made his claim, it was then shared at the Citizens Hearing on Disclosure held at the National Press Club in Washington in 2013. The agent is understood to have used a fake name throughout his career in the CIA, so the chances of his real name having been used in the account were never high. He worked for the CIA between 1957 and 1960, where he spent time in a military base in the southeast US where they analyzed physical evidence. In 2013, fearing he might soon pass away, the anonymous came forward for one more conversation, this time with, Richard Dolan. He claimed that he was taken into Area 51 to look at items allegedly found and retrieved by the US government. He also claimed among them was a flying saucer that crashed and landed in July of 1947 in Roswell, New Mexico. He stated that there were live aliens there and that he was taken to the S4 facility in Area 51. In his statement, he described seeing different saucer crafts in the facility, with the first place he visited holding the Roswell craft, and it was kind of crashed up, but apparently every alien that was in it died except for a few. The Roswell craft was also really strange because it looked like really heavy aluminum foil. At S4, he viewed the autopsy film, where the colonel on screen said, "What we've got in here is we're interviewing a gray alien." So the anonymous had no idea he was going to see the film, saying the alien didn't look human as far as the skin tone and basically the shape of it and the size of its head, compared with a normal human. Following the interview that he gave publicly, he was warned by the CIA not to conduct any further interviews or disclosures. Well then, if you never see me again, that'll explain it. In second place, we have a 2017 report in the New York Times. Yep, a 2017 report in the New York Times on bizarre sightings kept secret by the US military is the reason the US government now produces an annual report on UAP sightings, and Congress created a system for government whistleblowers to report sightings. More recently, two of the journalists who wrote that report have taken one giant leap forward and reported extraordinary new allegations. In June of 2023, they described jaw-dropping new claims from a decorated former combat officer who served as the US Department of Defense's representative to a UAP task force from 2019 to 2021. David Grush was quoted in their print report and in a later televised interview saying the United States has in its possession an aircraft of non-human origin, and not just one aircraft, he says, but many. He says the discoveries are numerous, involving everything from wreckage up to intact vehicles, and he says these items have been collected for decades by the US government, by allies, and by defense contractors. He says this information is being illegally withheld from members of Congress, and he's alerted them, as well as the Inspector General for the American intelligence community. So authors who reported on his allegations for the science site The Debrief quoted other US officials vouching for David's credibility, including Jonathan Gray, an officer in the intelligence community with a top secret clearance, who stated as follows: "The non-human intelligence phenomenon is real. We are not alone. Retrievals of this kind are not limited to the United States. This is a global phenomenon, and yet a global solution continues to elude us. Once again, if scientists and professionals weren't scared, this wouldn't all be kept secret. Just saying." Not like I consider myself an expert on this subject at this point or anything. And in our first place, we have the disappearance of experts. So back in 1968, a group of Soviet engineers who were working in the isolated region of Cao Bang, North Vietnam, in hopes of building a hydroelectric power plant, suddenly heard a rumble of engines overhead. And thinking that it was an American B-52 plane, they all ran out of their tents, but were surprised to instead see a black angular diamond-shaped object approximately twice the size of the moon, and which emitted a greenish-blue light. Moments later, a fiery comet-shaped object emerging somewhere on Earth struck the diamond-shaped object, creating a bright flash that blinded everyone, and then a powerful shockwave knocked the Russian hydrologists down and tore their tents apart, sweeping away all their equipment. Fortunately, no one was seriously hurt, but the explosion produced deep concern amongst those present. The original consensus was that a small nuclear device had exploded, since for several hours neither the radio or other communications equipment worked, producing only severe static. It wasn't until the next morning that it was possible for the group to contact their central base and report the incident. The scientists promised a full report of events and visited the closest village where, strangely, there was no sign of destruction or explosion, and the inhabitants only thought that they heard a very loud thunderstorm. So after about 2 days and about a kilometer away from their base camp, the scientists found a black half-sphere-shaped object about 3 meters in diameter. So the surface of the sphere was completely black, and it seemed that light did not reflect from its surface. Also, the sphere did not cast a shadow, with the rays of the low evening sun seeming to go around the strange object, falling on the high grass around it. By touch, the sphere seemed kind of cool and a little bit slippery, as if doused with soapy water. One of the men attempted to scratch the surface of the sphere with a sharp knife and was unable to leave a mark. They then notified their central base about their finding and received instructions from their main base to set up a protective perimeter around the object and guard it until a special group arrived at the site. They were strictly warned to stay 20 meters away from the sphere, so the entire group of 5 men camped exactly 20 meters from the sphere. I would have probably stayed a little farther for safety's sake, but Alrighty, they had no idea what the sphere could be, and guessed it was some kind of new weaponry of either Soviet or American origin. One of the specialists, Boris Ivanov, wrote in his journal that the men spent the evening staring uneasily at the object, in the light of their bonfire, with their carbines ready, just in case of any problems, waiting for the Special Forces group to show up and take control of the situation. At one point in the evening, one of the men, named Vyacheslav, rose and went into the brushwood for a prosaic outing, while the rest of the men remained at camp. When he didn't return after a too long period of time, the men began to nervously call out his name, but he did not respond. Even after searching the area with flashlights in the direction of the sphere, the men could not find Vyacheslav. Concerned and afraid, the rest of the men decided to not look any further and return to the bonfire. After about an hour, another man, Peter K., silently rose and also went into the brushwood, exactly in the same direction that Vyacheslav had taken. He seemed to move uncomfortably, rocking back and forth, apparently very drowsy. Yep, you guessed it, Peter K. also never returned. This time the remaining men did not search for Peter, but simply sat and waited. After 2 more hours, Vladimir M. felt called to the sphere, and yep, he also never came back. At this point, only 2 men remained, Boris and Sergei. Suddenly, Sergei's face became distorted. He rose like a marionette and meandered away into the dark, in the direction of the strange sphere. Moments later, Boris found himself tempted to move, and terrified, he grabbed his carbine and shot himself in the leg in an attempt to disable himself so he wouldn't walk away to an uncertain fate. As a result of the pain, he passed out, only waking up in the morning when the specialists arrived. They found him, half conscious by the now extinguished bonfire, having lost a lot of red bodily fluid, but still alive. And by this time, the sphere had disappeared, along with his comrades. Add that to another reason why I'm going to continue to avoid camping as a pastime.
Starting at number 5 is the abduction of Frederick Valentik. It all began on the evening of October 21st, 1978. The 20-year-old Australian pilot took off from Moorabbin Airport in Melbourne, embarking on a routine flight in a single-engined Cessna 182L, a plane he's flown countless times in the past. Frederick departed for a training flight to King Island over the Bass Strait between the Australian mainland and Tasmania. However, what began as an ordinary flight soon turned into a bone-chilling encounter with the unknown. As Valentik flew over the Bass Strait, he reported to air traffic control that an unidentified aircraft was following him. He fearfully described the object as having 4 bright lights and flying at unfathomable speeds. Air traffic control attempted to identify the mysterious craft, but could find no evidence of any other aircraft in the vicinity. The situation took a grim turn when Valentik's communication became increasingly distressed, and he reported that the unidentified craft was orbiting him from above. He described the UFO's appearance as metallic and shiny, and praised its maneuverability. It was then that his communications would abruptly cut, with the last thing heard from him being, "It's not an aircraft." Just before the communications were cut off, a loud metallic scraping was heard from Frederick's radio. Neither him nor his aircraft were ever seen again. Speculation around Valentik's disappearance quickly spread, with theories ranging from mundane explanations such as pilot error, mechanical failure, or deliberate disappearance, to the more sensational ones involving extraterrestrial encounters. Based on the information we have, all signs point to Frederick being abducted by some sort of malevolent aliens. The reported scraping noise heard before his communications were cut, likely the sounds of the pilot's aircraft being stuffed into a UFO. The true fate of Frederick Valentik remains a mystery, but the Australian government has assumed him dead after spending many long hours searching for the missing pilot. Where do you think he might be? Let us know in the comments. Moving on, we have number 4, Travis Walton. One fateful night, November 5th, 1975. The Apache Sitgreaves National Forest in Arizona, USA. Travis Walton, a 22-year-old logger, and his crew were returning home after a long day of hard work when they noticed some sort of metallic, glowing disc in the sky. Curious to see what it was, Walton and crew drove closer to the flying object. Once they got close enough to investigate, the forestry worker left the car to get a closer look and approached the hovering craft. Witness accounts vary on exactly what transpired, but the consistent chilling detail was that a bright blue-green beam of light suddenly emanated from the UFO, striking Travis and sending him flying several feet backwards, knocking him unconscious. Seeing this, his crew immediately fled the scene, assuming the blast of light killed Walton, leaving him behind. And before you go in the comments calling Walton's friends fake, don't worry. They returned a few minutes later, only to find that both Travis and the UFO had vanished. The crew was quick to report the incident to the local authorities, and a massive search operation was launched to find Travis Walton. No matter how hard anyone looked, nobody could find him. That was until 5 days later. Travis would reappear, disoriented and confused, in Heber, Arizona, nearly 30 miles away from the original abduction site. But the story he had to tell of the intervening days is the truly chilling part of this tale. According to Travis, after being struck by the beam of light, he awoke aboard an alien spacecraft. He described encountering beings he could only describe as humanoid, but with large bald heads and enormous black wraparound eyes. He reported undergoing a grueling medical examinations and being surrounded by strange technology aboard the craft. During his captivity, Travis experienced some form of telepathic communication with the beings, claiming that they conveyed a sense of curiosity and concern, as if they were studying him. Despite all of this, Travis said that he never felt physically harmed by the entities. After what seemed like mere hours to Travis, he found himself back on Earth, disoriented and unsure of where he was and unaware of how much time had elapsed. Travis Walton's encounter with aliens remains one of the most infamous abduction stories of all time, and has certainly earned its place on this list. Oh, next up at number 3 is the many abductions of Russ Kellet. And yes, that's right, you heard many. In fact, Russ Kellet, a 58-year-old man from North Yorkshire, claims he's been abducted upwards of 60 times. And those are just the ones he remembers. The first time Kellet was abducted was when he was 16, when he was traveling home on his motorcycle until he saw a strange tunnel that he'd never seen before. Curious, he drove through the tunnel being faced with a bright light, and then the next thing he remembers is lying down on an operating table, surrounded by 15 feet tall alien men. He related their appearance to Dracula, minus the fangs. Kellet reported that the Dracula doppelgangers pushed a tube down his throat and pumped a mysterious liquid into him. He claims made him a super soldier. He recalls checkered rooms and special glass orbs used to control the navigation of spaceships, and has made several sketches of the parts of his abductions he remembers. Ever since that first abduction, Russ would battle in a multitude of intergalactic wars and conflicts, so he claims, having fought all sorts of different aliens, such as one race of aliens called the Dragos, which are tall and scaly and have dragon-like heads. After the aliens are satisfied with his work, they wipe his memory and send him back to Earth. These missions would vary in length, between lasting for days to lasting for years. However, from the perspective of us on Earth, he is only gone for hours at a time. His explanation for this was that time moves differently on the planets he's sent to fight on, where a day on one planet could be mere seconds on Earth. Skeptics were quick to dismiss Russ's accounts of his second life as an alien super soldier, but he claims he has proof. Last year, Russ was able to capture footage of what he says are several UFOs, the same ones that have been abducting him and taking him to the corners of space to fight space wars. Whether or not his outlandish story is true is for you to decide, but me personally, I'm not signing up to be drafted for any intergalactic wars. Moving on to number 2 is the most iconic abduction story of all time, the Barney and Betty Hill incident. The Barney and Betty Hill incident, which occurred on the evening of September 19, 1961, is one of the earliest and most influential cases of alien abduction in UFO history. The Hills, a married couple from New Hampshire, were driving home from a vacation in Canada. As they drove through the White Mountains of New Hampshire, Barney noticed a bright light in the sky that appeared to be following the couple everywhere they went. Out of concern, Barney pulled over to get a better look of the object through binoculars, and to their astonishment, they saw what appeared to be a disc-shaped craft with multicolored lights hovering in the sky. Unsettled, the Hills hastily re-entered their car and started driving again, with the mysterious craft still in pursuit. As they continued their journey, the Hills noticed something strange, that there were 2 hours that had passed that were completely unaccounted for. Over the following days, Barney and Betty began experiencing anxiety, bizarre dreams, and inexplicable memories of the encounter. In hopes of finding answers, the couple consulted with a local psychiatrist who used hypnosis to uncover buried memories of the event. Once under hypnosis, the Hills were able to recall the terrifying events that transpired in those lost 2 hours. They described being taken aboard the vessel and seeing these short aliens with grayish skin, large black eyes, and slits for mouths. Barney and Betty recounted being subjected to intense medical examinations, including the extraction of bodily fluids and having organs observed. They would go on to detail their feelings of fear and helplessness during the encounter too, saying that they felt like they were going to die. A great reminder of why we use anesthesia before performing surgeries, guys. After the media picked up their story, the Hills' lives changed dramatically. They faced both support and skepticism from the public, and their story ignited a broader fascination with UFOs and extraterrestrial life worldwide. Despite the enduring controversy surrounding their account, the Hills remained steadfast in their belief that they had indeed encountered beings from another world. Until their passing, they maintained their version of events, and their story has become a touchstone for anyone interested in investigating UFO abductions. What do you guys think? The story is just a hoax? Or has it got some credibility? Comment below your thoughts and let me know. Finishing off at number 1 is the Berkshire County incident on the night of September 1st, 1969 in Berkshire County, Massachusetts. Multiple witnesses reported a series of UFO sightings and encounters. Residents all over the town recount seeing a UFO flying above and around Berkshire County, with statements remaining consistent with one another, making this one of the most plausible UFO abduction stories of all time. The most significant incident relating to this UFO involved 2 separate families who claim to have experienced a close encounter with the unidentified craft. According to the witnesses' accounts, around 9 p.m., Tom Reed, a 9-year-old boy, was driving through the woods with his mother, grandmother, and younger brother. Suddenly, they would see a bright object descending from the sky. In response, Tom's mother stopped the car and they watched the object, which was about 40 feet in diameter, hover above the ground. Then, the next thing the family remembered was being in a different location entirely. They claimed that they were now about a mile down the road and the UFO was gone. The family would go on to report that in the following years, they experienced recurring nightmares and strange encounters, suggesting possible ongoing contact with the extraterrestrial entities. Other families in the town reported similar occurrences and UFO sightings around the same time. Over the years, the incident gained attention and underwent various investigations by UFO researchers and enthusiasts. Many try to explain the strange event as natural phenomena or mass misidentification, but the fact that so many people reported the same thing, it's hard not to believe them. This is the first time an entire town has been affected by alien intervention at the same time, and remains the most frightening cases of abduction due to its sheer scale alone.
Number 5. Hypnotic regression. Many people who claim to have been abducted by aliens are unable to remember a lot of the specific details of their abductions. Because of this and the public stigma against people with alien experiences, many people choose to never come forward, or their stories are written off as delusion. But in the spirit of giving people the benefit of the doubt, let's talk about a certain woman's experience with hypnotic regression. A woman who claims she was abducted by aliens was put under hypnosis in order to give a documentary crew information about the visitors from other worlds. When asked how aliens are able to travel at such incredible speeds, she responded with the following: "I can't explain it, but it's like if they want to get from one point to another point, they remove what's in between, so they don't have to travel that distance. They are instantly from there to there." When asked why aliens are studying humans, the response was, "They are very wary of humankind. Mankind is progressing technology-wise, and soon he's going to come across technology that will allow him to peel back the layers of dimensions. And they want to know all about man for their own benefit. Man's warlike, aggressive, an animal. He's in possession of technology that is more than he is. There's no balance. And they're very wary that he's now on the threshold of many breakthroughs, one of which is peeling back dimensions. It's like an onion skin. You peel back one layer, and there's another one underneath, and another one underneath, and another one underneath. The same with dimensions. They're scared. Do aliens really study humanity out of a fear of what we will do once we discover interdimensional travel? And if so, how do they feel about all the UFOs we have apparently shot down? What do species historically do with groups that they are afraid of? What fate awaits the human race at the hands of these interplanetary visitors? Number 4. Sam the Sandown Clown. Our next story comes from the January-February edition of the British UFO Research Association Journal and concerns an anonymous man going by the alias of Mr. Y, who claims that one October night in the year 1970, he was driving to visit a friend when he saw something hovering over the swamp to his right. It was a huge UFO with several different multicolored orb-like lights brightly illuminating the craft. He got out of his vehicle to observe the craft for a moment and then continued on his way. He looked out his window and realized that the craft was now following him, its lights spinning. Mr. Y got to his friend's house, and the friend was amazed at the guests that had followed him there, before disappearing into a nearby tree line. For years, Mr. Y would see the red orbs following him from time to time, watching him and stalking him. Doubting that anyone would believe him, he kept these encounters to himself until 1973, when his 7-year-old daughter Faye and her friend were playing near Lake Common Road when they heard an eerie wailing sound. They followed the sound to a nearby meadow, and the wailing stopped. They walked over a small bridge when suddenly a blue-gloved hand with 3 fingers appeared from under the bridge. They looked looked in the small river and saw a strange figure standing in the middle holding a book. He was described as being 7 feet tall and without a neck. He was wearing an odd and tattered costume consisting of a green tunic with a red collar, white pants, and a pointed hat with a black ball on top and 2 antennae. He had a pale white face, lips that never moved, red hair, and triangle holes for eyes. The children watched in shock as the figure hobbled over to a strange metal hut. Not long after, they saw the figure again as he wailed, and then spoke into a microphone asking if they were still there. He then communicated by writing in his book, saying that his name was Sam. They asked if he was a man, and he said no. They asked if he was a ghost, and he said, well, not really, but in a way I am. He said that there were others like him and that he was afraid of being attacked by humans. He invited them into his metal hut, which was filled with wooden furniture and elaborate knobs. The children hung out with Sam for an hour before leaving, and a year later, she told her father about the encounter, telling him that there had been men nearby fixing a post who had acted as though they could not see the strange creature. He had trouble believing her, but he had had enough experiences with aliens of his own that he had to consider the possibility that it was real. Did Mr. Y's daughter really see a strange alien in the woods, or is this just the overactive imagination of a child? In an age where spacecraft are being seen all over the world at an alarming rate, we really can't rule anything out. And what of the UFO stalking Mr. Y? What were they hoping to see, and why was he selected to be the subject of their curiosity? This mystery will likely never be fully unraveled. Number 3. Aliens take a baby. Our next entry comes courtesy of phantomsandmonsters.com and describes a 14-year-old visiting the home of some seniors and seeing something more terrifying than they could possibly imagine. As they themselves told it, I witnessed an alien abduction back in 2002 when I was 14. A friend of mine wanted me to help her grandparents set up their computer. I said sure and rode my bicycle to their house. I got there and clouds appeared, so I decided to make this a pretty quick visit. I set up the computer and installed some software for them, showing them all how it works and such. They go back and sit on the couch while I get my backpack to get ready to leave, as their other granddaughter, who is about 6 years old, was sleeping in the other room. All of a sudden, a cold breeze went through the room. It was odd, as all the doors and windows were shut. The grandparents looked towards the kitchen, and what I saw made me freeze in place. There were 3 creatures standing in the kitchen. 2 of them were short, gray alien creatures, with thicker necks than usually described, with the eyes closer to the sides of their heads. They wore silver jumpsuits. In between them was a taller creature that looked like a humanoid mantis, wearing a black robe with a yellow stripe going down the middle. They walked to another room, and a minute later returned with the robed creature carrying the granddaughter in its arms. It's looking at me, and I get the feeling it knows who I am. I don't know why I got the feeling, but I did. I was very scared. The grandparents were looking at them too, but not doing anything. I thought, screw this, and fought off all the fear I could and clumsily charged towards them. I didn't even make 3 steps before the grandfather stopped me and told me they will bring her back. The creatures didn't move and continued to look at me. I couldn't get any more words out of my throat because I didn't even know what to think at this point. All of a sudden, a light stretched around them and they vanished. An odd glow remained for a few seconds before fading. After a minute of awkward silence and the grandfather repeating, "She will be brought back," soon I decided to leave. I rode my bicycle home as fast as I could while looking back, hoping that nothing was following me. I didn't sleep that night after I got home. The next day, I told my friend what had happened, and she told me it has happened before. The grandparents and other family members have tried to stop it, but to no avail. They just accepted it with a look of defeat and moved on. The granddaughter was brought back after a few hours. Not long after I witnessed this incident, their whole family moved elsewhere. I've heard from other people who claimed to experience similar events, and I feel they are legit. Why are aliens taking babies away from their families? What are they hoping to learn? And is there some way to stop them? One can hope, but it seems unlikely. Number 2, dream or abduction. This next story is from an anonymous Reddit user who claimed to be abducted and experimented on by aliens before waking up at home with injuries related to the experiment. As he told the story, in July of 2015, back when I was 19, I lived in a house in Southport, Sacramento with 3 other friends. I woke up one night to a light coming through the ceiling of my room, and it lifted me out of my bed. Next thing I know, I'm in some kind of chair and unable to control my body, like I was drugged with something. There were guys that were not human men, but gray people with large black almond-shaped eyes doing stuff with what seemed like medical instruments and machines. I was very terrified. I was unarmed, naked, unable to move. I was so scared. One of them was touching the machine that put the tube down my throat and into my stomach. His hand got close to my face because he had to adjust something holding my head in place. I remember getting a good look at his hand and eyes. They had long fingers with pads at the tips, sort of like salamanders, and they don't have fingernails. Their skin is gray, but kind of like a powdery translucent gray. They had large heads with small necks, so small and thin it didn't make sense. Their arms and fingers were long and skinny too. I was in the chair with my head and jaw held by something so I didn't see their feet. I'd say the tallest probably stood about the height of my lowest rib, and for reference, I'm 5'10". The tube machine sucked out the food I ate earlier that day, and then was pulled out of me. I don't remember how I got there, but then I remembered being in a cage made of some kind of metal that reminded me of aluminum. In a room with curved walls. In front of me was a man who looked a lot like a human, talking to a gray person on a window that lit up a screen like a hologram. The man was tall and looked like a human, except that his skin was very white and his hair was blonde and platinum. He spoke with a gray person on the holo screen in a language I didn't understand. He wore a blue flight uniform of some kind. This man was obviously military of some sort judging by his uniform. The gray person spoke in a language that sounded like birds chirping. Once the call was over, the holo screen turned into a different display with symbols, and the man turned and walked to me. He crouched down and spoke to me in plain English and said to me, "Everything's gonna be fine. I'm going to get you out of here and take you home." I was so happy to hear that. He opened the cage, and next thing I know, I fell on top of my bed with my back hitting the mattress first. I immediately got out of bed right after I fell. Was this a real alien abduction or simply a horrible nightmare? Typically, I would think it was merely a bad dream, but the user describes extreme pain in his throat for days afterwards from the tube being forced into him. What was the source of this pain if it was simply a dream? Truly a strange encounter to contemplate. Number 1. The alien and the bassinet. Our final story is another from phantomsandmonsters.com about a woman who was asleep in bed next to her baby's bassinet before waking up and seeing something that would make any mother panic. The following is an excerpt from her account. "I turned over on my side, facing the bassinet, and noticed a bright light coming in between the window blinds. I thought out loud, is it morning already? The light was coming in between the blinds and it was so bright, but the rest of the room was dark. There was also a bright light on the wall next to the window, and I looked up to see where the light was coming from. To my horror, just above the bassinet was an alien's gray face. It was just the head, no upper body, legs, or arms. The head was dark in color, very round, ending in a pointed chin, and there was a small slit for a mouth. The nostrils were small, but the eyes were large and almond-shaped and very shiny black. It had some sort of glass lamp on the top of its head. The light on the wall was projected from the lamp. Then I noticed that the being was looking down at my baby daughter. Oh my god, I couldn't speak. My heart started pounding so hard that I started trembling uncontrollably. It saw me and realized I was looking at it. The being moved towards me and I started screaming and swinging my arms. I remember that I screamed out loud for it to leave. It floated from its original position above the bassinet to just above my face. I remember seeing this light blue fog build up in front of my face, and then in a dreamlike manner, I heard a cooing sound similar to mourning doves. I had the feeling that whoever was talking to me was stern and was telling me that it was for our own good. The woman then describes waking up with a sore spot on her head and the alien being gone without a trace. She insists it was not a dream and that she really saw an alien creature that she believes will one day return. For her sake, let us hope it was simply a dream. Number 5. The uninvited house guests. Our first tale of the day comes from a woman in South Australia who was having a boring and typical day, getting the cleaning done and just generally living her life, when she suddenly found that she was not alone and that there were strange creatures unlike anything she had ever seen in her home. This is her story in her own words. "I don't wish to give my name. I was a teacher in South Australia for many years. In 1976, I was hoovering my sitting room floor at about noon. Suddenly, I felt quite ill and thought I was going to be sick. So, I sat down on the sofa to see if the sick feeling would subside. I then saw that I was not alone. There were 3 strange little people standing alongside the sofa, just looking at me. I froze with fear, as I had never seen anything like them before, not even in films. 2 of them were short and fat, about 4 to 4.5 feet tall, with broad faces and enormous black eyes, but with only a hint of where a nose or mouth might have been, almost like a pencil drawing. They had wispy bits of brown hair at the back of their heads, and they were wearing brown shrouds or robes. These beings, I knew instinctively, were the workers. The other being was female, thin and about 5 feet tall. She wore a black shroud and had black wispy hair at the back of her head. Her face was very elongated, with huge, dark, piercing eyes. Like the others, there was just a hint of where a nose or mouth should have been. The thin one started to speak to me with her mind and told me I was to go with them. I said in my own mind that I would not go. Somehow, this telepathic communication seemed perfectly normal at the time, and I felt quite comfortable communicating like that. I was very frightened, but I could still communicate and understand. I was so frightened because it seemed they were pulling me away with their minds. I had to struggle to resist them. At one point, I remember falling down and trying to crawl towards the door. I must have fainted or something because I have no memory from that point onwards. When my husband came home at the usual time, I realized that I had lost about 4 hours. I still have no explanation for this experience. Did this woman really do psychic battle with aliens in her living room? Or did she simply suffer some kind of temporary insanity that caused her to hallucinate and lose time? Regardless of the answer, the experience caused her to feel true terror almost beyond description, whether the cause was real or not. Number 4. Honk if you love alien Jesus. Next up, we have a minister who believes that he is in contact with strange aliens who are dedicated to spreading the word of love and peace throughout the universe. As he put it, I wish to remain anonymous because I am a minister of the Baptist Church in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and some people might think that what I have experienced is against religion. I have had 3 meetings with humanoid beings from the planet Koshnak, located in the vicinity of the constellation of Orion. Their vehicles can travel in space and can also somehow pass through our planet. These beings appeared to me to have melon-shaped, completely expressionless faces with thin lips, tiny noses and ears, and extremely large eyes without pupils. Their eyes are green, with scintillating flashes. Their expression in the eyes is intense. They always seem friendly. One of them is called Ohenesto, and he is the one who mainly communicates with me. This is a kind of telepathic communication. He tries to explain complicated ideas of time and space to me. He has told me that they travel in the 7th and 8th dimensions, which are unknown to Earth humans. These beings are aware of 13 dimension. Their lifespan is about 800 to 1,000 of our years. They can continue life forever with only one cell of their body. They are beings of other dimensions, of other worlds, but they are not gods. From time immemorial, teachers of light came to our planet from other planets, from other systems, even from other galaxies and realms, known to us as the non-physical or supernatural realms of existence. Great companies of light came into incarnation on our Earth, carrying with them the message of truth and love and light. I believe that our Lord Jesus Christ is one of these beings. Number 3. Alien Dance Party. Next, we have a rather strange tale from a man who claims that when he was young, he was transported to a pavilion filled with aliens who were having an intergalactic sock hop. Is this truth or madness? I'll let you be the judge. When I was young, I had some very strange experiences which affected my entire life. This was in the 1930s. In 1935, I had pneumonia, which in those days was a dangerous and sometimes fatal disease. One evening, right at the dark, 2 beings came to the window in an elongated envelope. They and their conveyance were like the Northern Lights. They asked me to go with them, and each took a hand. When they touched me, it was like being lightly tickled. Very pleasurable. The odd part was that you could see through them, but they were there, and we talked without sound. They took me to a huge pavilion where couples were dancing. My impression was that the males were dressed in black and white trim. The females were dressed the opposite way. There was no ceiling, but crystals hung above and made music beyond comparison that sounded to me like wind chimes. I had 3 visits to this place in all. On the last visit, a female asked me why I was afraid of the dark. She said to me that both the light and the dark are my benefactors, and they would make them equal. She took a crystal and placed it in the palm of my left hand. For a moment, it resembled the Star of David, 2 triangles. Then it melted and ran between my fingers. After that, my night vision changed. My eyes would adjust quickly so that I could see even when it was pitch black. I recovered quickly from my illness. A few months later, on a camping trip, I found I was the only one awake late at night, watching undulating shafts of bright light. The shafts of light began a strange, seemingly patterned movement. I was trying to puzzle this out when suddenly there appeared my transparent envelope in what looked like an oval cylinder. It just seemed correct to get in. In an instant, I was inside the pavilion again, but the beings were not dancing as before. They seemed to be conversing silently, but not with me. A female asked me to step up on the dais, because I was their conductor. Number 2. The Secrets of the Universe Revealed. This next story features a man who made the acquaintance of an alien race who taught him about the building blocks of our very universe, which was pretty cool of them. This is his story. I am a graphic designer with a good visual memory. What I saw was visually very vivid, but it doesn't make much sense. However, it may have been the most important thing that ever happened to me. In November 1980, my wife and I were driving north of Dundee when suddenly I saw a cerulean blue light pointing at our car from the sky. After that, I have a fragmented memory. We both have a fragmented memory of some bizarre events, but there are a lot of gaps. Basically, we somehow lost about an hour's time. I remember seeing a hairless, tall, man-like being in a blue robe. He was looking at us, inviting us aboard his craft telepathically. His costume struck me as absurd. He was the leader in a blue cape. The cape looked stupid, illogical. He was mentally luring us up to the spacecraft. Somehow, the next thing was, we were on board a ship of some kind, being examined, quite painlessly, by another being wearing a yellow robe with ruffled collar. Also, somehow completely absurd, incongruous. Suddenly, the examination process turned nasty. I felt my mind was being forcibly invaded. I had no control. My brain felt like there was a tunnel that goes through my mind to theirs. Our minds are connected. It could have been a tube or a tunnel of light, gray-brown. It was horrible. It pulled everything out of my head. There was a terrible sound, piercing, high-pitched. My thoughts had turned to goo, but I could see them visually. They had my mind, but I still had it too. Then it seemed as though I was okay again, but I felt completely different mentally. I can't explain this, but there's more to it than anyone knows. There's more to life, more to the world. There's more to everything than anybody knows. More dimensions than things coexisting. There are many more than 3 dimensions. Everywhere, it all works together. Everything coexists. I still can't explain all these thoughts, where they came from, and so on. Number 1. A UFO sighting. To end our compilation, I have selected a story of a UFO sighting. Not really much else to say about it. Let's dive in. My name is John Healy. At the time of making this officially transcribed statement, I was a detective with the Cleveland Police Department. I was also a U.S. Army reservist, training as a flight medic. The incident occurred when I was traveling on a helicopter with 3 other reservists on the evening of October 18th, 1973, about 10:30 p.m. We were halfway between Columbus and Cleveland, near Ashland, when the crew chief saw a red light on the horizon. He asked the pilot if there were any towers around there, and was told there were not. As we went along at an altitude of about 3,000 feet, the light seemed to be growing brighter and brighter. It appeared to be on a collision course with us. It kept coming right at us. The pilot had to put our helicopter into a power dive to avoid it. We were looking right through the windshield, watching this thing, and it damn near came to a stop right over us. It just hovered for a while. We all got a very good look at it. It had a steady red light on its prow. It was cigar-shaped. There were no wings on it. It made no noise, created no air turbulence, shining down out of aft end. It shone down and on us, and you could see a definite cone shape, the shape of the green light beam. I've seen aircraft from PTI-9s up to C-5As, so I know an aircraft when I see one at night. But this thing scared the living hell right out of me. We contacted Mansfield Airport and told them we were almost in a collision with an unidentified flying object, operating at 3,000 feet and 600 knots. Mansfield never acknowledged our broadcast. We tried to get a hold of Cleveland Airport and we couldn't until the object passed over us. It continued to the west, picked up speed, and we lost it over the horizon. We never saw it again. We talked about this sighting all the way back and we just couldn't dope it out. The thing didn't have wings, but at 3,000 feet, you have to have wings to stay aloft. It couldn't have been a dirigible or a Zeppelin because those things don't move at the speed this thing moved. Clandestine aircraft wouldn't operate at that speed at that low an altitude. All 4 of us filed official reports. Did these people really experience alien encounters, or were they simply mistaken, delusional, or lying? Have you ever seen an alien? The dark forces that run this dimension want to know, and ask that you let us know in the comments below, and they recommend that you like and subscribe.